Hi, Dana, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yep, thanks. We getting started in a moment here.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you that may be viewing online, we're just delayed at the moment. We're just waiting for another counselor to arrive, even though we have quorum. The meeting will commence as soon as that gentleman arrives. Thank you. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our special council meeting of June the 15th. Thank you for bearing with us as we wait. We just had a bit of a delayed start, but that's okay. So I do wish to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the territory of the Sauk Nation. And council, I'd like to turn your attention to item 3, which is approval of tonight's agenda, please. Moved by Councillor St. Pierre, seconded by Councillor Beddoes. In the interest of those that are viewing online, Councillor Lajeunesse is with us virtually tonight. So there are 6 members of council here. Councillor McMath was unable to join us. So as for approval, all those in favor, please. And that's unanimous. Thank you. Item 4, please, would be that council resolve into committee of the whole to discuss the official community plan bylaw number 800/2022. Moved by Councillor St. Pierre, seconded by Councillor Beddoes. All those in favor, and that's unanimous. Okay, so we're sitting as committee of the whole. So a reminder to council that only one mover is required for any motion that may emerge. So first off, our only real item of business is our official community plan review under 5.1. I'll just ask staff, is there a presentation tonight of any sorts?
No presentation, just that we would recommence with part 3, which begins on page 53.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Paolo. So on that note, just in the interest of those viewing, council has been doing either you could call it chapter by chapter, page by page, line by line review of the draft. We determined at the last meeting that we would just work our way through it start to finish, recognizing that this isn't a novel, rather it's a guiding document. So one doesn't approach it like you read a book. It references other pieces. However, rather than jumping around through the document, it just made sense to progress in this way. So that is why we are indeed starting on part 3, page 53, which is growth management and land use. So council, I'll turn your attention then to page 53. Go ahead, Councillor St. Pierre.
I understand that we didn't want to change tack at the last meeting, but having gone through the document a few times, I think that I'm more and more of the thought that the document could be abbreviated and made much more clear if we actually put the policies with the objectives, with the action, like basically collected things, especially like I look at the transportation and so on. You've got ongoing, you've got short term, you've got long term. If all of this stuff was actually with the suggestions, members of the community would know right away, for example, this is something we intend long term. As it is, people, unless they stick it out right to the very bitter end of the document, which is quite lengthy, they don't necessarily understand the good thinking that's gone into it. They don't understand that some things are already happening. Some things are short term, some things are long term, some things are, we're just going to prepare for it and we don't expect it to happen. I think it would be much better in a general sort of way if the document was organized this way, even if we don't organize ourselves this way tonight to look at the document. But I would love to look at the document that way, because that would allow us to just go through sections and just probably fly through it.
Well, I think I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor St. Pierre. So I think that's something we can take away, but I think just because we've done it a certain way, I don't want to change the approach that how we're doing it. I don't think we'd fly through it either way. We get more confused. Just saying, if we start to jump around. So as intensive as it says, I think it's better for me. I'm just more comfortable because that's how I came prepared to deal with this tonight. Yeah. Okay.
Just want to say it.
Thank you. 53. Go ahead, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, I think Councillor St. Pierre makes some good points. I wonder if the contents pages could be, you're talking about the action plan. We have part 6 implementation. There's no reference to an action plan. It states delivering picture soup. So, you could annotate the contents page a little just to help navigate through a document that does take a few reads to figure out. Yeah.
Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, also bear in mind that I think everybody knows this, that it's not to read like a book. This is basically a planning document for staff mainly to interpret up in the future. So it may be tough for a person off the street to read it, but it's not designed for that. It's designed for staff to get direction on where we're going in the future. So I think we've all come to that conclusion that it's not going to read like a book. And I think if we continue on the same path and just go through it, we will get to the end and hopefully all be fairly happy with the changes. I'm sure you got a number, Jeff. So anyways, I like to proceed. Just
Okay, Councillor St. Pierre.
I would agree. Let's get her done. Having said that, the content is, as far as I'm concerned, really good. Okay. I'm just suggesting that, like, for example, our strategic plan has everything in landscape and, you know, collected together. It's beautifully brief. You can really understand what's going on.
it was difficult for the committee to use this format too, but as we got used to it and saw where we're going with it and staff explained, you know, how it all fell together, then it was a lot easier.
Okay, Councillor Lajeunesse, just because you're online, so that I don't miss you, I don't want to keep turning to you even though there's no comments. So I'm going to need you just to speak up. Should there be something, just say like point of order or something. You're not sort of in my sight line, you're off to the side. So you are on my screen, but you're not on my field of vision. So I'll just need you to speak up if there's a comment that you'd like to make.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so anything on page 53 from anyone? My only comment is the formatting of the text. They used center, so it kind of jags in and out. Like it should just, I would just have it more like the other sections. It should be formatted the same as the other sections where not everything is centered, because then you have, like, what is it called when things all kind of go just to the left? Like it is on the territorial acknowledgement, everything is just left margined. So you should just keep the same formatting through this rather than starting to center the text. I think it's fine for the heading to be that way, but not the text document itself. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, I always like this expression, "soup smart growth." And that's an established foundation in the 2010 OCP, and it's vanished from this document. And I think soup smart growth is in fact focused residential growth. So if you do want to create any continuity between one document and the next, which strikes me as this is one in a series of OCPs, that might be one simple way to do that.
So that's on page 53?
53 under focused residential growth, or you could drop soup smart growth as it was known in the 2010 OCP into the text.
Or you're on the next page?
That was oh, I'm sorry, I'm on 54.
Oh, you've already moved on.
I'm a hot mess today, as someone said.
So,
mess.
and that's under focused residential growth.
Yeah, sorry.
Soup smart growth.
Yeah.
Everybody's happy with.
Yeah, 53 were good. So moving on to growth management objectives. Yeah, and I tend to agree with Councillor Bateman because there has been work, there's good work that's in that. And I think we should carry on. So,
I don't think
Good
that'd be a
work.
difficult change, so.
no, it would just need to be defined a bit, or maybe this is the definition of what that means, right? Is to say like soup smart growth. It just, how do you define what that is if someone's asked?
There's a glossary, so you could put a soup smart growth definition straight out of the 2010 OCP if you wished.
Good catch, okay. Councillor St. Pierre?
I'm on to page, I think, 55 at this point with future neighborhood planning. And one of the things I would like to see perhaps included is future neighborhood planning, not just for Kaltass and Spit. Because I think as the community grows and as we end up with areas that become more distinct, like within Spit, Town Center, Sun River, and so on and so forth, along with the idea of having local amenities like the local commercial nodes, which makes a whole lot of sense, it would be appropriate to have some sort of plan for those neighborhoods similar to what's intended for Kaltass. So So I don't know if we could put something in there to, at this point, to reference that, because I think that should be something we're looking at in the next 10, 20 years. Basically having some sort of a plan for the various areas of Souk to make them into more complete neighborhoods that are walkable and so on, to allow the residents to have a chance to have a voice in it.
Okay, so question to Mr. Paulo, because that came up even like here, there's a reference to Kaltassin Billings Spit Neighborhood Area Plan. But there was also discussion of the need to do that within the Gateway residential itself. And then as Councillor St. Pierre suggesting in Sun River, yeah, because we have like Whiff and Spit, Kaltassin's Billing, pardon me, Kaltassin, Billings and Whiff and Spit are the only ones identified in here. But what about those other neighborhood plans?
During the engagement process in developing this document, those neighborhood plans were not areas that had been identified. Specifically, it was the Kaltassin and the Whiff and Spit areas, just given that there was development potential. The Sun River areas and the Gateway residential areas are captured either through comprehensive development zoning or the Gateway residential land use policies, not requiring additional neighborhood planning. I mean, it is eventually something that could be developed, but this plan was not identifying that was something that we had heard in the initial engagement process. It was those two focused areas of Kaltassin and Whiff and Spit.
Okay, Councillor St. Pierre.
Okay, my observation there would be that specifically, for example, living in Sun River, and many of us do, there's not a lot of commercial there. There's a need for more things to happen. There are lands that need to be developed and utilized. I do think that the community needs to figure out what it wants for itself in many ways. And I think that's going to apply to a lot of other places. So for example, one of the things that we've agreed to in our strat plan or OCP is they want to maintain the character of Souk. A lot of that has to do with people knowing each other, smiling at each other, so on and so forth. Once a community gets past a certain point, and 15,000 and growing is definitely past that point, that character is lost. And one of the only ways to actually retain it is to start actually focusing on specific areas, getting people together to recognize themselves as, a neighborhood, working together, and that way you can keep the feel of Souk. It starts being the feel of Whiff and Spit, the feel of Kaltassin, and the feel of Sun River, but nonetheless, it's the feeling of Souk. And I think that having at least some intention and some language to that effect would go a long way towards actually achieving what the OCP says it wants to, which is maintaining the character of Souk.
So I agree with you there. And I say that because even though it didn't come up in the engagement, it may not have been in mind at the time. In terms of Sun River, like we are putting in a significant amenity that's opening to the public very soon on those lands. We also have an exceptional allotment garden, the only one in Souk is located within Sun River. We're advocating for a significant bridge crossing to connect Sun River with the rest of the community. And there's significant wildlife corridors throughout that, as well as places of significance to the south. So I would agree that that is missing, because even with the sport box, there's still additional lands that, yes, there's the lands for the school district. There's also still lands that we've set aside. So how then do we, look at what else we want to do in those lands if there's nothing in here? So, I would agree with that. I also think a good example of placemaking is what's occurred in the Ponds corridor. You saw just was sort of like a grassy knoll, but now with the addition of the dog park, the Stickleback Trail coming through there, Rotary putting in the gazebo, potentially a small library, like there's a real sense of place occurring in that area. If you could add some, creative artwork, and I know there's community members working on that, it'll really create a really vibrant sense of place. And that is what we want. The commercial that's happening in Sun River, yes, there's the daycare, but the other is just happening by chance. So, and there's still undeveloped commercial lands within there. So I would agree with that. Whiff and Spit may have come up without, I'm not sure how it arrives at how it is, but likely because of the wastewater discussions. Well, if that doesn't advance itself, then what? So why one neighborhood and not another? One's seeing potential more growth occur, the other one has nothing. So does that mean that we're limited to what comes up through public hearings? Like, that's not engagement. So I agree with that. And I think even breaking down the neighborhoods, going back to the gateway, why I raised that one was because at one point in time, whether I think it was the last council, there was a discussion that occurred as to whether or not we do a gateway or a Casinos neighborhood plan first ahead of the OCP or the OCP first. And it was decided to do the OCP and then follow up with these neighborhood plans. And that's where we are seeing really unique commercial activity occurring. I think we should harness that energy. And I mean, I see it where proximity to Harborview, 3 businesses have occurred in that area that blend in well with those natural, the surf shop, the bike shop, like it's all tying into that neighborhood. So I think we should harness, like find a way to build capacity around those. And there are other commercial places. There's the old Zoom station that's under some form of redevelopment now. Like there's going to be things occurring. Daniel's Market and Souk Oceanside Brewery, like all of those things. So it is, I agree with you fully on that. Councillor Bettles and Logan.
Yeah, I think rather than go down and list, 47 different neighborhoods of Souk, can we not just put in other neighborhoods of Souk after neighborhood area plan in other neighborhoods of Souk? So it encompasses them all. And who knows what comes up in the next 10 years. So rather than list every neighborhood in Souk, and then people have different definitions of what a neighborhood looks like. So if we could just add that statement, then I think that would take care of it, or something like that. Jeff could wordsmith it a bit.
Councillor Logan.
This paragraph here ties into one of our action items, which is it's on page 159, to initiate a neighborhood area plan process for the Billings, Kaltassin, and Whiffenspit areas in partnership with the Sauk Nation, with a time frame that is contingent on sewer servicing strategy. So I think if we were to add another piece to this, it would be important for us to also include it as an action item and have a specific time frame listed as well.
Councillor St. Pierre.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that as I think Councillor Beddoes was alluding to, maybe the first step is simply to identify other areas that could be identified as a distinct neighborhood. And obviously we're looking at things like rivers, mountains, and various things that actually help us define it. The first step would be defining where we expect those neighborhoods to form. And so maybe that's the next action item, along with moving forward with Kaltassin and Whiffenspit, simply identifying where other neighborhoods are expected to be meeting a plan.
Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, I think action 1 in the implementation plan, of course, are those 2 area plans, sewer contingent. And, we have a lot of language in the document on limited small scale local serving commercial hubs in neighborhoods. And so I imagine through you to Mr. Palo, in the zoning bylaw process, will those locations of neighborhood hubs be identified?
Typically, there's a need brought forward by the community requiring these neighborhood area plans, right? Whether it's an infrastructure requirement that would then open up further development potential, or there's just overall redevelopment potential that the community is identifying. So it's really one of those processes that I think the community provides input into that process, and then council through budgeting processes, and then with staff with their work plan and using our master plan documents to determine what is the best strategy moving forward to address those community needs. So if it's a neighborhood area plan, then we would go through that process and engage with the community to see what is the future intent. Areas like Sun River, that's a comprehensive development zone. So a lot of that planning went through early on in the process to establish what that community was going to look like. I think the little pieces that I'm hearing through conversation tonight is that we want to address business opportunities and park amenities and other development potentials. Well, those might lie best within the Parks and Trails master plan or within the employment land strategy that we want to take on afterwards when we are addressing the business side of things. So a neighborhood area plan might not be the best tool to address that, because from a land use perspective, it seems to be that that's already been identified through that previous zoning and subdivision process. And it's more the more site specific detailed aspects that other master plans can probably address, like I said, with the Parks and Trails and the employment land strategy.
So I hear that, Mr. Powell, but I disagree with you. I would add Sun River to this because we are advocating for infrastructure with the trail system. We have a new amenity coming to that, which is an economic driver to that particular community. Not all the lands that are being developed there are even part of Sun River. There's the area on, I think it's Anthony or something, no, not Anthony. It's a separate development that sits beside Sun River between Demamiel Bridge and Sun River Way, but that's not part of Sun River, it just happens to be next to it, although people think it's the same. So we think of that as the neighborhood, the amenity being the community gardens and now active farming in there and everything beyond. And the push for infrastructure is part of our emergency evacuation route planning. And what does that look like? So while there is wastewater capacity there, even the comprehensive development zone that was approved back in 2004 has changed significantly since then. We've changed what we've allowed on that site. We've moved the school site. It's all shifted from what the original CD zone is. So that's where I think there's a need to re-engage with the community. We were once talking about a ball field and soccer field in Sun River, and that's changed to a sport box. It's a lacrosse box now. A lot of broom. So I think there is a need to still put together a proper plan. The sign that identified it as Sun River Estates is gone completely. There's nothing there to even call it Sun River anymore, aside from the road names and how people refer to it. So I would like to add Sun River to this and then have another neighborhood plans added as those other items emerge. Councillor Logans?
I hear you, Mayor Tate, but we can't arbitrarily add a community. We have several that probably are going through similar challenges and have similar needs. So I think if you're going to add anything to this, it should be, I think Councillor Beddoes alluded to it, that, or perhaps St. Pierre, that we put in an action item to look at where a neighborhood plan is needed. There's
What
many
was
CD
approved?
zones that have changed.
I know that, but we're opening a significant amenity to this community that will bring a lot of outside residents to Sun River for good reasons, to recreate. So it's changing by virtue of having that amenity there. It's changing the neighborhood. So we need to engage with the community on it. And when there, people ask, what else is going here? I have no idea on the areas that are flattened around. And even that site location has changed. This is an over $1 million amenity that we're adding in, and we're advocating for another $1 million infrastructure as we speak right now to connect this community. Councillor St. Pierre?
I mean, obviously, I agree that Sun River would likely be identified as an area that would need such a plan. But one of the reasons another reason that I brought this up, other than trying to maintain connections between people and keeping that distinct character of Souk alive and well, is something that Director Paolo alluded to, which is just massive redevelopment. And we're looking at needing to do a lot of redevelopment over the next 10, 20 years as we manage to basically reduce our emissions, as we change all of our transportation, as we try and increase the amount of employment that's local, as we try and increase the number of jobs that are locally available within the neighborhoods, as an aging population basically shifts and then wants to age in place, and suddenly all the single family detached doesn't work, but they'd like to actually be able to stay put. Almost every area of Souk is looking at needing to basically address things like the housing crisis, climate crisis, getting employment in, and this is all happening in the next 10, 20 years if we're lucky. Like if we're lucky, we can actually get a good start on a lot of this stuff as quickly as possible, because that's when it needs to happen. Without getting the input of the community, we're going to have basically pushback from the community. If you try and say, listen, we should put this thing here because it's going to be good for you, that is not going to fly. So the community needs to be included, and a CD zoning that was put into place 10, 15 years ago is no longer relevant to a housing crisis, a climate crisis, and all this stuff, all the various crises we're having right now. We need to actually get the communities on side, get people involved, and figure out what to do. I think that what's been said so far is fine. Council Beto says, let's just say include other communities. We put in the action plans that will identify them, and I think we're good to go. And then as future councils figure this out, we can decide if the Sun River needs to be first or what needs to happen first. And obviously, I think Sun River is going to come up pretty quick, but that's.
Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, I think we could add a new action item number 99 under, it would be under land use, as are the other area plans. And it would be a medium term 99 along the lines of investigate further neighborhood area plans and branding. It's a kind of branding exercise. People coming together to get some pride about I live in Broomhill. That could be 99, but I think it needs to be medium term, not short term, given the priority of Caltassin, I would think.
Okay, well, I'm going to test a motion and just make a motion that Sun River be added as for a neighborhood plan, so that the motion would be that council directs staff to add Sun River to this section. I think to add Sun River to this section. So I'm moving that. I don't need a seconder. Just to motivate, I worry that if this is not in here, that our advocacy for a new school and the trail crossing will disappear with community needs occurring all over the place. There is a need to connect Sun River for the children safely to the rest of Souk. It took over 10 years to get a sport box in our community. And I worry that, that all the other efforts will disappear if it's not made as a priority. The CD zone that was approved in 2003 is dated and no longer relevant to today. It doesn't even reflect what the community looks like there today. And so I feel that even with the concerns that residents have with the bridges and access for emergency and so forth, and I know that everyone in the community is pinched when it comes to those sorts of disasters, but there is only one way in and out of this place. And if the bridge is out, everyone is stuck with nowhere to go. And so we are bringing an extraordinary amenity to this community now and changing the whole feel of that community. And I feel capturing the character of Souk and all it makes it special is important. The community allotment garden was a big way to capture that character of Souk.
I think it would be.
Hello.
I'll recognize you
Dana.
after Councillor St. Pierre, Dana.
Darth Vader.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think it would make sense to include Sun River simply because in any future action, Sun River is certain to be recognized. Simply because it is, you've got the river, you've got, it's very geographically isolated from the rest of Souk. It's very distinct in itself. So it's obviously going to be recognized as its own thing. And as it has been pointed out by our mayor, there's things that need to be dealt with. That doesn't mean it would necessarily be first on the line, by the way. As far as I'm concerned, we might identify in this process other areas of Souk that need a neighborhood plan worse. Like, for example, I'm thinking the waterfront might come up higher than Sun River for, as a thought. But I do think that it makes a lot of sense because I don't think it's going to duplicate work and I don't think it's going to undo anything in the future. I think it's definitely going to be one of those neighborhoods that's recognized. It's a no-brainer that's going to happen. So if we're in agreement that these plans are appropriate for the future, then certainly including Sun River should be appropriate.
Councillor Lajeunesse.
Yeah, I'm not sure why we need to identify any specific neighborhoods here. Why not just have a more general statement where we are going to look at developing neighborhood plans for the various neighborhoods throughout the community? Because there's Church Meadows, there's potentially Farrell Estates, Grant Road. There's a lot of other areas that are being kind of tossed aside if we identify only a few specific areas. So I'm not sure why we're discussing just specific neighborhoods here.
So what I heard from staff was that the other two came up because of the infrastructure discussions and the engagement that's occurring around the wastewater connection. And so I heard our director of planning advised that it was the infrastructure needs. And then that's where I said that we're also doing that exact same piece for Sun River right now. So it should be recognized in that way. But I agree. And then the other ones will come about over time, but we're nowhere else are we putting $1 million amenity and then some into a neighborhood right now. Mr. Paulo?
Yeah, just to add to that comment, the engagement piece was surrounding questions of the public about what can be done with those specific areas, and the determination of what those land uses could be in the future would be dependent on the servicing piece in the future. It wasn't specifically tied around servicing could be going there. So what can we do with it? It was the people were specifically asking first, what can we do with the land? And we said, we can't make that decision because future servicing could decide that. If servicing was out of the question for that area, we would have drilled down a lot more based on, okay, this is an unserviced area. Let's determine what land uses are appropriate. What we said is we put a pause on those two areas specifically because it would be premature to make those land use decisions without knowing what the servicing piece was going to be. Servicing wasn't leading that conversation. It was more the land use piece was the primary conversation, but premature to discuss until we know the servicing.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other comments from anyone on the motion? Councillor Logans?
Sorry, I swallowed water wrong there. There is a potentially major development in the Broom Hill Otter Point area that could change how that neighborhood looks. The Western Town Center neighborhood has been ignored for decades, and there are potentially others that we should be looking at. I don't think adding a specific neighborhood at this point is a good idea. I would like us to make it a more broad statement. Just because we don't have a neighborhood area plan for Sun River doesn't mean advocacy will stop. So I don't support the motion. I would support something that's more open to other neighborhoods being included.
Okay,
But I do think that the ones that are included for a very specific and important and timely reason.
okay, thank you, Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, of course, this information came out from our engagement with the public. And quite frankly, I didn't hear a whole lot of things about Sun River. And I understand the mayor's, because she lives there, she knows of some of the things. But this is what came out of the engagement. And I think if we just have a generic statement in other neighborhoods of Sioux, I think that would take care of it. We're not going to ignore Sun River. We're not going to ignore all these other areas. But if we start listing the whole ball of wax of all those neighborhoods, why are we picking one and not the other? These two were specifically brought up by the public numerous times, and that was because of the sewer situation. So it made sense to put them in here. If we just had a statement in other neighborhoods of Sioux, I think that would cover it. And Sun River is one of those neighborhoods of Sioux. We're not trying to ignore Sun River, and I understand there's a lot of things there, but just if we make this change and then we get a call tomorrow, someone saying, well, how come you're spinning off Sun River and not my neighborhood because it's just as important? I think we run the risk of we just go on and on and on. It'd be 10 years before we finish it. So I think a generic statement, and I think Councillor Lajeunesse was leaning towards that too, would suffice. I'm not trying to give a bum's rush to Sun River. It's a very important part of our community, but I think we can deal with it under a generic statement. I mean, these are just big generic statements right now, but those two were specifically brought to our attention time and time again. And so it warrants being in there by name, and they're new. So I'd rather see just a generic statement rather than put a specific neighborhood.
Councillor Bateman?
Well, as ever, I can see all sides of this, and I can see the logic of wanting to celebrate all that's happening at Sun River and using it as an advocacy piece moving forward to get that school and to and other issues and the Demamil Creek crossing. And yes, this statement is tied to a very specific action plan, action item number 1. And I think I agree with Councillor Beddoes, the addition of a statement following other neighborhood area plans and will be considered over the 10-year term of this OCP. And if your motion fails, then I think we could easily add a short-term or medium-term action item requesting exactly that, neighborhood plans elsewhere in Sioux.
Okay, no, that's fine. My last comment would be, I'm only raising this because of the sport box. Not because I live there. It's because we're bringing teams and people and all sorts of recreation to what was otherwise just a quiet field of broom and blackberries. It's going to change the traffic pattern. There's going to be a need for a crosswalk on Phillips Road. And what else is going to go on the land that is currently fallow there? So there's a lot of moving parts to this and the character, and it's changing. So that's why. It's because there's a significant amenity with programmable sports coming to this neighborhood. That is why I'm raising it, for that reason. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? And any opposed? Everyone but me is opposed, so I guess that's defeated. Councillor Lajeunesse, I don't know how you voted at all.
I was opposed.
So I didn't see your hand, so you're gonna need to raise your hand, because otherwise I would have put you in favor, because I don't hear or see anything, which means you're not voting, which means you're in favor. So that would be 1 in favor and everyone else in opposition, and so be it. Okay.
So I'll do.
We only need a motion if we don't find consensus. So if it's the agreement then that and other neighborhoods, then I don't think we're gonna need a motion for that. If it's by consensus. This one I could see was not gonna be by consensus, so that's why I put a motion forward.
So will there be an associated action item in the implementation plan?
I don't know. So on this note, are we looking, let me back up first. Are we adding and other neighborhood plans then? Is that the will of council to do that? Okay, seeing nods from 3 others. Do I need a vote or? Yes, a vote? Okay. So the motion then, Councillor Logans, would you like to make it?
Oh, no.
Okay, so Councillor Bateman, you make the motion then, because then otherwise
This
it,
particular line to this.
yeah.
I would like to move that an additional line be added to under future neighborhood planning to state that other neighborhoods within the district of Souk will be considered for neighborhood plans over the 10-year lifespan of this official community plan.
May not want to say 10 years because our last one is well over 10 years.
Over the lifespan of this official community plan.
Okay,
And yes.
well, we haven't gone to the action item page, so let's just stick with the page item in front of us. Yeah, I know, but I'm getting confused. I need to see the motion now. Sorry, folks. Councillor St. Pierre.
I seem to recall the last time we were doing this, staff was very good about just taking notes on changes to be made, and we didn't need to do a motion for each and every one.
We don't have consensus. So when we have consensus, we can do that, but we don't right now because Councillor Logans doesn't support any change to this language. So in which case we're not all in agreement, so we need a vote.
Already.
Right? Is that your?
Yeah, that's good enough.
Okay, so that's moved by Counselor Bateman. Other neighborhoods within the district of Sooke will be considered for neighborhood plans throughout the life of the OCP. So I think we need to start with that one and then we'll look, if it passes, then we'll jump to that section to put in an action item. So at least we're tying the two together at this point. So to motivate, go ahead.
Well, I'm motivated, I had no thought of bringing this up tonight at all, but it's true. Starting from Councillor St. Pierre's comment that there are multiple neighborhoods in Sooke, and I think they are actually given some mapping within the Parks and Trails Master Plan for one, where they talk about West Sooke and others. And so the sense is that we're looking to help neighborhoods create some identity, their ability to put on a T-shirt that says I live on, I'm part of the Viewpoint Estates. That's not a neighborhood. I don't know.
I'm a spitter.
And we can do this over the course of a decade. They're going to be very different kinds of neighborhood plans than these two in particular, since they're built on major infrastructure changes. These are more like character building, branding, neighborly exercises. Thank you.
Okay. Counselor Logans?
I'm not opposed to councils thinking about other neighborhood plans. I think it doesn't make sense for us to talk about this without also having an action item in conjunction to it. But yeah, are we doing an action item one after this? Okay.
Okay, so good. I will call the question. All those in favor, please. Any opposed? Counselor Logan is opposed, so that one carries on a 5 in favor and Counselor Logan's opposed. So now, can you remind me which action number that was?
Well, we have a choice to make it under short term. Make it under land use number 50 or medium term. I think it's 3 to 5 years. Thereabouts. That would be number 99.
Number 50 on the action items, I have equitable community under there.
Yes, that's true, but we would have a new.
I can just barely hear Jeff thinking out loud.
Oh, sorry.
What page?
Actually, it'd be a new number 51 under short term.
Just, I'll go to you just a second. It's just that heading though is equitable community. So,
Yeah. So number 51 would become land use
oh, I see.
to be consistent with number 1.
And what was the other number that we looked at? Where is, I think the other one was item number 100,
Yes.
right? On.
Yeah.
That item, action item 100?
That would be action item 100 and it would go under land use.
But action item 100 says work with the South
Yeah.
CRD.
So it would
To
become, that
identify-
would become 101 if we were to add this. action.
What page are
That's
we on?
not the relevant connection. Like I was looking for the action item that is connected to that. Could you remind me on that, somebody?
It was number 1.
That's what I'm trying to find out which action item was specific to those neighborhood plans.
Number 1, page 159. Yeah.
No, this is why it's just getting confusing.
I can offer some clarity.
Yeah,
perhaps.
please, somebody.
So if you go to the top of page 159, action items, land use, it's the only area where land use is identified in this because it's unique in the sense of we're speaking specifically to land use as a matter in the document, and then all other ones are related to transportation, parks, and so forth. So if we're talking about a neighborhood area plan in the sense of establishing alternative land uses, that would be the location for it. If we're talking about other elements within a neighborhood, then it might fall within a different area and it might not really be associated with a neighborhood plan. Might be another item.
Yeah, so that's what I was looking for was page 159. And then the connection to that is number 1. And then I think the action item should be in that particular section. This one here, the time frame is contingent on sewer servicing strategy. So it's either a third item that we add a different piece there. But I think if that's my only weird thing about this whole section is that if we don't receive the funding for the grant, then you'll need to tell those communities then that nothing further is going to happen for a neighborhood plan because it was all based on sewer, nothing else.
We can modify that because it's contingent on sewer servicing strategy. If the strategy is we're not able to provide municipal servicing to that area, the strategy is that you're going to be rural. And so do we take a look at a neighborhood area plan based on rural servicing and what are those density requirements and servicing capacities going to attribute to alternative land uses?
Yeah. So I think it's going to be one or the other. Councillor St. Pierre.
I was looking at the various other headings that this could fall under, and it could fall under quite a few of them. But I think land use is generic enough to be the most appropriate. And unless we want to get into major discussions and trying to tease it all out, I think let's just put it in land use.
So for this one, how do you want to put it in here?
The languages are there. Consider and identify neighborhoods in Souk for neighborhood plans. It's right in the addendum that was created. That would be the action.
And then, so I don't know what we're adding to this section.
Identify and consider neighborhood plan, or identify neighborhoods in Souk and consider for neighborhood plans.
So a third item, is that what we're doing? Or is it under the, is that
A
under
third
action
item
item
under
one?
land use over here.
The item, we're adding a third item, okay. Identify neighborhood plans. Can you repeat that so staff can get it too? Or staff has that? So a third action item under land use, identify neighborhood plans.
Consider and identify neighborhoods in Souk. For future neighborhood plans. That's it.
Are we in consensus on this or would we like a vote? Councillor Logans?
We should also discuss the implications of page 74.
74.
Page 74 at the bottom.
The whole of page 74. I don't think it's a huge situation, but
Under, okay, under neighborhood area plans.
right.
Sorry.
So then the same language could be same thing.
Excuse me, your worship.
Yes.
Can we just go back and identify the time frame for that action item for neighborhood plans? Is it medium term, long term?
Medium term. And then any comments, Mr. Paolo, to Councillor what Councillor Logan's raised on page 74. This one again just deals with billing spit, Kaltassin and Whiff and Spit. So we're just looking additional directions. Is there the need to add something here too?
Similar text as to what's been added elsewhere, that other neighborhood area plans would also be in consideration for development.
Okay. Councillor St. Pierre.
I'd like to thank Councilor Logan for bringing this one up because I think that the purpose of the neighborhood plans could include things like how to fully develop the local economy and so on and so forth. I mean, there's other elements that are not included here. Creating connection and distinct character for a neighborhood, helping to enhance the local economy and reduce the increase the use of active transportation. These are the kind of things that we could totally include into the neighborhood plans and should be included in the Whiffen, Spit and Kaltassin. If we're doing the exercise anyway, we might as well make it as useful as possible in terms of our overall objectives.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. So I think maybe we need to flag this one, and then as we come to it through the process is add that when we get to that page. Rather than, so now we're starting to jump a bit, so. So I want to go back to is council wanting this to be a motion? The first one passed, so it's kind of like this is the follow-up piece. So then I'll move this myself then. Consider and identify neighborhoods in Souk for future neighborhood plans as the action item on page, whatever it was, land use number 1. And the timeline was medium. Page 159. So that's the motion. So we can just move on from this. Okay, would anyone like to speak on the motion? No, go ahead, Councillor
Yeah.
Bateman.
My one concern was that these two neighborhood plans identified here are involve major infrastructure projects, whereas these others more logically would belong under recreation and community services, I would think, since we're looking at enhancing these neighborhoods rather than opening the door to major development and infrastructure. Okay, then
But
all
we
is
don't
good.
know that at
Let's-
this
let's move
point.
on it.
Councillor Beddoes?
Just bear in mind that this official community plan is talking about the broad strokes. And I'm getting a little concerned that we're drilling down to great details. The details come later. We've got the broad strokes. So, when we start talking about this sports box and that, and these little neighborhoods, we'll be here for the next 10 years doing this. I mean, this document is designed for the broad strokes. And then as the community progresses, then we start drilling down to the fine details. As long as we don't have anything in here that's going to hamper us from dealing with these things, then I just caution everybody that, let's be careful about drilling down too deep, because we have ideas on how deep. Other people have ideas as well. And we've already consulted everybody, and this is what's came up. And it's just the broad strokes. And I think those little comments, I don't think they hurt. I don't have a problem with them, but just keep in mind, please. I mean, that we don't need to drill down at every possibility that comes up. I mean, otherwise we will have a document this thick and nobody will read it. So just a comment.
I agree with you, but this document is not broad throughout. It gets very prescriptive at some points. And that's what we've heard from other members of the community. And that's why it's a mixture of both. And that's why it's hard to stay broad when it gets really detailed at the same time. Okay, I'll call the question on this. All those in favor, please. Any opposed? Councillor Logans is opposed. That carries. Okay, so still looking at item 3.1 on those 2 pages there. Going back to page 54 and 55. Or sorry, is that right? Oh, my glasses, 54 and 55. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of my colleagues here suggested that I do not bring up the minor copy editing. So I will, if it's fine with council, I will submit those separately.
No, I think this is the
You want to hear
time.
them? Okay. I'm working, yeah. I need to see this on the screen. My printed copy of this OCP is the previous draft, which has been updated. I've left my laptop at home in my rush. So as we've been doing throughout the process, if we can see the page by page as we progress. Thank you.
The page, no, okay, that's the wrong screen share.
So 54.
I'm working off.
Here we are. I think this is page 54. Is that right?
That's 55.
And that's 50.
That's 55, and so the page before that is
Okay. Let's go to 55.
nothing on 54. Okay,
No.
that's where you caught the Steve Smart Road.
Yeah,
55.
55. You just want to have. Yeah, you want to better understand lowercase neighborhood scale dynamics. I told you, it's going to be minor. Yeah, let's do that one.
Where did you see that?
First line.
To better, oh, I see, right, lowercase neighborhood. Yeah.
So it's going to be at that level. Do you want me to proceed with those kind of, there's some commas and
Interesting, because the old version of it is. lowercase.
it
Oh,
is. yeah.
jeez. Well, I think,
Same with your font.
That's why I didn't want to
Font is-
speak to it.
I think if it's glaring, you know, like your edits are always so helpful. So I think, you know, because I didn't see that.
So would that be defined as glaring?
I'm
Or,
glad you caught it.
okay,
I don't know.
but I,
Okay. We'll
Okay,
just
we'll
continue.
leave it at
Anything
that.
else here?
No.
I guess the question I have for staff here is with the growth management objectives, and this may be the wrong place, like what about fire service coverage? Like we talk about the infrastructure growth, like fire service and fire service delivery is fairly important to how we grow. So is that missing or does that fall into somewhere else?
In the overall community services piece, when we talk about the actual policy sections, that's where we talk about the necessary services to serve our community. So that would include first responders, municipal servicing with water and whatnot. So it's encompassed in there. What we're talking about in the growth management section is more land use based with respect to those associated land uses.
Okay, Mr. Schaefer?
Your worship, if it's suitable for council, we'll endeavor to provide you with identical documents so that when next Tuesday comes around, we can all be working on the same stage document. And I realize that the notes have been made in the documents that you have, but perhaps, you know, upon receipt of new documents, you could have the updated documents, you could compare and contrast. That way, everybody's got the same page numbers and the same references and.
Can we maybe do that by request though, by the counselor? Because I'm on my second printout of this.
Okay. Yeah,
And my notes are in
that's
it,
fine.
so I don't want to carry a third one around. I'm already confused. Counselor St. Pierre.
Is the electronic copy provided for the meeting going to be the most current and the one that would be printed?
That's correct. The version that we're using is the one that was given first reading, and that's the one that's been consistent since
Okay,
that time.
That's what I'm using, and I wouldn't need
So if you could all email me if you want another one, we can certainly provide you with one.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so we'll move on to the next section, 3.2, land use. Counselor St. Pierre.
Just a quick request. The FAR has come up regularly as something that's confusing. I think that just a graphic just to explain it. So something that shows, you know, floor area, something that. Is that on there? Okay. Oh, right, from the open.
I think the FAR is a very simple calculation. Basically, you multiply the FAR by the lot area and divide the number by the number of stories, and that gives you the lot coverage.
No,
It's
absolutely
actually
And I
very
think-
simple.
simple. Unfortunately, it's escaping a lot of people and they don't know what's going on. So something that could just quickly explain how to interpret the tables and the FAR so that people can actually figure this out.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe just expand on the definition a little bit.
well, there is a good, we've already done some good work as Counselor Logan showed from the open house. So that that work that was in response to the queries raised by the community should come in here now. I would agree with that as well. I don't know. Too many. I think it's a good diagram to add. If it's electronic, then it doesn't matter how many pages. It's all in one space. Counselor Bateman?
So on page 56 is our first citing of the controversial 70 units per hectare. So I think we need to, you know, there's concerns in the community that this means that throughout community residential, anywhere in community residential can rezone to get as many as 70 units per hectare. So I think as much as you've previously stated this a number of times, I'd like to hear again how this will play out. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So how it will play out is based on the maximum densities we allocate within each zone within our zoning bylaw. So by allowing a specific maximum, that will determine X number of zones can be considered within the community residential area. If there's a zone that says 90 units per hectare, we would not be able to consider that that zone because the maximum would exceed that maximum density of 70 units per hectare. It wouldn't be properly compatible with that area. So it's looking at specific zones that address that maximum density. And then you get into the town center where the densities are higher, you get different zones that would be accommodated there because they would be supported by a higher density.
So to read from this page, it states maximum densities within each designation will be informed by the policy direction of the OCP and the site-specific zoning provided in the zoning bylaw. Meaning that in this future zoning bylaw, there may be spots on the map that would accommodate that kind of density. But the rest of the community residential without the necessary zoning would not.
Correct. There would be a variety, even as it exists right now. There's different areas within the community residential area that have different densities. So as an example, with today's zoning requirements, an RM3 zone has a maximum density of 70 dwelling units per hectare. You go to the RM4 zone, there are 90 dwelling units per hectare. So developing to that maximum would not be compatible for that area. So there would be a break point within our zoning bylaw where you could consider these specific zones leading up to whatever your maximum is that the OCP is stating. And then after that, we have other zones with higher densities. We have to make sure our OCP can actually accommodate them. So we do that by allowing the town center area to have those higher densities to accommodate those other zones.
So then this is where if someone came in and wanted, say, the 90 units, then that's where the process would be, okay, you now need to apply for an OCP amendment to increase what is in the OCP.
If they were proposing in an area that was not supported by the OCP, correct.
Right,
All applicants would have to consider an OCP amendment when their zoning didn't comply with the OCP.
If they wanted it higher than what is already in here. But in this case, this is the maximum. It could be in some 40 and.
Correct.
Right.
Based on a full technical analysis, what is appropriate for those neighborhoods, likely the neighborhoods in general planning, those neighborhoods closest to the areas of higher density are going to experience higher density zoning as opposed to the ones that are further away from your town center. And you create that transition further out to the lower densities. And then ultimately you get into our rural zones, which are the lowest of the densities.
Right. And in this case, any applicant would still need to, even if the OCP, let's say in the community residential says 70 units, they would still need to go through a rezoning process. If that parcel is, say, only zoned for 60 units and they wanted to increase it to 65 or 70, they would still require a rezoning. I think that's the.
Correct.
That's kind of the, like an informational piece. It doesn't automatically allow this just because the OCP allows this as a maximum. There is still a zoning requirement needed if someone wanted to achieve greater density on the land. There is still a public process to go through. Just because the OCP is the maximum in there doesn't mean you automatically receive that with the land.
Correct. And that was the message that we were wanting to clarify with the public, because I've experienced this throughout my entire career where zoning gets mixed up with OCP land use designations, assuming that once you make this change in the OCP, they have that zoning that we're referring to, which is not necessarily correct. The zoning is established by the zoning bylaw. That's your implementation tool. This is the guiding piece that says, visionary wise, what would we like to see density across our community? And then from there, using the zoning bylaw with more specific regulations per each site, how do you actually develop that to meet that vision?
Councillor St. Pierre, then Bateman.
I'm assuming this has been done. I was hoping to move on from this particular point if people are ready for that.
Yeah, we will in just a minute.
Yeah,
Councillor
so
Bateman?
I just want to read from one of the correspondence we received. So, and just to reply specifically to this. So currently the majority of land within the community growth area in Souk has a density of 10 units per hectare, 4 units per acre or quarter acre lots. This new proposed plan increases it to 70 units per hectare or 28 units per acre. Another way of putting this is that it works out to 7 families and 14 parking stalls per quarter acre lot. This is not what Souk wants. So when you hear that, could you reply to that?
My response would be, as it stands right now, our town center area is very specific in the current OCP. What's being proposed in this OCP is segmenting off specific areas to focus on our waterfront, our core area, and then our transitional residential area to address those densities. And then we establish a very similar community residential designation throughout the remainder of the community before it then turns into rural or gateway and so on. So my response is, based on a very broad community residential designation that we currently have, those higher densities could be proposed much further out of the town center. It's the process of going through a rezoning application and the technical studies that justify why those densities should be supported there. We look at transportation, the necessary infrastructure to service those, and then decide, is that appropriate? And the public weighs in on that process. That wouldn't be any different should this 70 units per hectare go forward as is and be adopted. Those same considerations would have to be given at the rezoning stage to determine if that density is appropriate. What it's allowing, though, is addressing a housing need by saying we can actually add more density and provide for more housing based on a good rationale through that zoning process. And we leave that to the developer and the public to inform that process, and council ultimately making a decision on that with the staff report.
More, and there was a comment as well around BC assessment looks at a new OCP, or as a trend has begun apparently, whereby they look at OCPs and they think, okay, here's an area that could be rezoned, and hence they get a higher assessment. Any thoughts on that?
I contacted a staff member at BC Assessment just to understand how that's all factored in. And they get that question quite a bit when a community goes through an OCP amendment and this concern is raised by the community. And typically it's among members of the community who have owned land for quite some time, and this change, this land use and density increase hasn't been contemplated so close to their property. And now they see it right on the doorstep and they're concerned what it's going to do to their assessment. So the response that I received back from BC Assessment was that they have certain provisions to recognize longstanding property owners and the use of what their land is, so that they can be recognized that there isn't that development potential, that they're not speculating on the property. They've lived there for 15, 20 years, whatever period of time that is the minimum requirement to obtain that provision through BC Assessment, so that they aren't assessed at that higher amount. So they recognize, and they specifically outright said, we're not out to kick people off their property because they can't afford, an increased assessment. They want to recognize longstanding residents and the use of their land. It's those cases where property is purchased based on speculation, And then that's factored into what that development potential is, because then it's being demonstrated the use of the land is not for its longstanding use. It has development potential at that point. And BC assessment will discuss with the property owners what that intent is if they have a concern. They have an appeal process where they can have that ongoing conversation, and BC assessment will ultimately determine if it's appropriate or not.
My last question regards, could not a future very development-minded council utilize this provision and allow some radical rezoning in our quieter neighborhoods? Does this give them license to so do?
I believe you're commenting on the fact that if a developer came forward with a rezoning application to envision that higher density, could that council support that zoning change and allow for that higher density? The answer would be yes, that's council's decision. But recognizing that decision is going to be what's going to come before that decision is a staff report identifying where the policies and other technical rationale on that application are supported or not supported, as well as the opportunity for the public to weigh in at the public hearing process as to whether they support it or not. There may be certain areas further out where that type of development is supported and other areas where it is not. It's allowing for that broad approach as a visionary document to establish these areas, and then for each specific application to make the rationale as to why it should be supported.
So yeah, I would say still possible, but still subject to a zoning process. Right, so there is still that. Councillor St. Pierre?
Yeah, just a further comment to that, if you had a very, very pro-development council, they could also just simply amend the OCP. And so it's, if you have a council that wants things to move forward in that particular kind of direction, it's just one more step for them to do so. But this provides a good framework that has the flexibility. And then the zoning does provide the implementation.
Thank you. And lastly, stories is the current term. Over the years, it's gone from levels to height and meters, back to stories. I was once told that stories is really dated language, but I see it's made a comeback. I know, right? Because I was told, no, levels is what we use, levels, not stories. I'm like, okay.
It comes down to the conversations that we have with the committee, with the public, and then what's going to be understood within the community. So stories seem to be the best representation of height and what would be acceptable.
Councillor St. Pierre?
Directly relevant to this one. I was curious, is there any, you have a maximum height or maximum number of stories, but one of the things that we've experienced, I think, pretty regularly in the town center is a single level where we'd really like to see denser development and higher and more stories. Do we have the ability through the OCP and at this point, potentially in the future zoning as an implementation tool, to have a minimum number of stories? Specifically, for example, in areas like along Route 14 and so on and so forth, where it seems to make the most sense.
So those prescriptive requirements can be considered within the OCP. The main factor moving forward, though, is that they're properly addressed within the zoning bylaw. So that's one of the challenges that we have right now, is that while the OCP that we currently have will say 4 to 6 stories, and a lot of people will say, well, we prefer the low end, 4 stories as opposed to 6 stories. If the zoning bylaw only has the maximum, then the developers are proposing the maximum, right? They're going to do what's going to create the greatest density. So if we want to set specific parameters within the OCP, we can translate that over to the zoning bylaw to make sure that's still implemented as well. So if you want to have a minimum and a maximum, that's fine in the OCP. We just have to make sure that that carries over to the zoning bylaw as well and is represented there.
I don't actually see any minimums within the document right now. And I personally feel that there are areas where we might want to consider it. So I'll just open that up for discussion.
Like minimum heights?
Yes, I mean, for example, recently we had an application, very nice developers and so on and so forth. They had a nice vision, but right in the town center and very, very low density as for what it could be. And we have no ability to affect that as it stands. we have a wish for buildings to go in and have, for example, living areas above and so on and so forth, put in that density. But there's no requirement to do so. And so whatever is easiest is what happens. We don't actually have the downtown that we're looking for. We have the downtown that's most convenient and cheap to build. I'm suggesting that may not be what we want for the future, and we don't seem to have the tools presently, or our staff doesn't have the tools presently to have any impact on those trends. So I think that unless we make a change there, we'll just get more of what we've gotten, is what I'm saying.
I'm not sure how to approach that. And I just raised that because down, I'll use Artisan's Garden as an example, which is a single story building with that slopes. So I guess with their basement, maybe their main or below grade level. But it's not 2 stories, like looking at it on the street, it's a single story building that's commercially zoned, that has provided quality employment for well over a decade. And so I worry that if there's, and we have a number of houses that have been converted into viable businesses, whether it's dentist office or distillery or law office or accounting or whatever. So if we put in I hear what you're saying fully, how would we allow for that commercial development to unfold? In some cases, they would be unable to remove the house and build something big. It's about taking what's existing and converting a house into a viable business. So that's where I don't know how to put in a minimum there. I hear what you're saying for those developments that have come up that have been single story. We heard it a bit with the library as well. But that's where I don't know. I don't want to lose that potential that would exist with someone just transforming a house. Mr. Palau?
Yeah, there could be unintended consequences, specifically making a site undevelopable, because if we set certain minimums that can't even be achieved because of parking, landscaping, whatever the case might be for servicing that lot, we might render that parcel undevelopable just based on not being able to meet minimum requirements. Hearing the conversation, I think what the main concern is the specific uses that are allowed within those zones. If we address those, then maybe we can address some of these density and design concerns based on specific uses that we're allowing.
So that's where it could be just on that, you could say, okay, ground floor commercial with residential above as the use, as opposed to where everything got thrown in where cluster housing is allowed. So then that's what we got. And that's through the zoning process. Okay. Councillor Beddoes? Did you?
I've almost lost my train.
I just it's what the market will bear. And the thing is, if we start putting minimums on, I think we tie ourselves up pretty good. And my feeling is that if there's dollars to be made by going up, not many developers are going to come in and go to the minimum. They're going to go to the maximum. So I think it's almost a moot point. I understand that last one was a bit, but I think that's going to be a very rare occasion. I think more often than not, we're going to go up, and yeah, big time.
Councillor Logans, then St. Pierre?
Yeah, I don't think that's something that belongs in the OCP as an umbrella document. It would have to be specific to certain zones or uses.
Councillor St. Pierre?
Yeah, I accept the rationale that it might make development very challenging. I was just hoping for some sort of means to support, for example, we can definitely have a situation where a developer simply doesn't have the deep pockets to do the kind of development that would be most profitable because they don't have, like $1 million to spend, and that's not going to be unusual. In those particular cases, I would hope that there'd be an encouragement for, partnerships or looking around to see what can happen. But if that's not possible, I don't want to tie people's hands in terms of moving forward either. So,
Hello.
Councillor Lajeunesse?
Yeah, I was just with the most recent one on Townsend Road. I think that's what we're referring to. That, to me, that's a flaw in the zoning bylaw. The town center commercial zone as it's defined by title, allows for that use. And I think that was a mistake to allow for that use. And I think the Tim Hortons is another example where, because of the town center commercial zone, they were only required to build a single story, same with Shoppers Drug Mart and others. So I think we need to take a look at our zoning bylaws and get them sorted out so that we can avoid these single story structures in the town center.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I would also put the TD Bank and the Royal Bank in that category as well, and even the library, right? It is what we're working with, but that's so it goes, right? Councillor St. Pierre?
Is there room somewhere for more general language that wouldn't be prescriptive to encourage this so that those zoning bylaws can be developed in that direction?
Would that be in the town center? Will we get to that in the town center specifically? I believe. Let's address it when we get to the town center part. Okay, Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, just some general questions here. I was reading through the public engagement materials and I took out a few quotes. And one person said, this OCP is heading in a drastic urbanizing direction. Now, how does that ring to you, Mr. Pallot? Oh, and
How about Councillor Logan's and Mr.
Sure.
Palo?
I completely understand that sentiment, but what I think is being forgotten when people make those statements is that we're trying to reduce the amount of traffic leaving Souk and coming to Souk every day and increase our economic development opportunities. And to do that, we need to densify the core. That's what it comes down to, in my mind, is this is all about changing the economic development of our community, and it needs to happen. So it's a huge change. I can totally see how it scares a lot of people, but is it scarier to have housing downtown or to drive Souk Road every day?
Yeah. Mr. Palo, anything to add to that?
Sure. I pulled a Bateman on the weekend and I went down a rabbit hole and started reading a lot of documents. I ended up back in July of 1999 reading incorporation information. And one of the comments that stuck out to me was about wanting to incorporate to look after the local needs that this community could identify and could do that best by incorporating and becoming the district of Souk. So that resonated with me because I thought about that throughout this entire process. And I thought the urban and rural question keeps coming up. Well, the need of the community, as it was told to us through engagement, was that we need to have these services, we need to have housing, we need to have all of these pieces that can really be best served in an area designed in an urban format, because that's where it's best accommodated. But our concern is still in protecting and preserving the rural character of this community. And so that's why we need to have those defined boundaries of what is urban and what is rural. And to do that best, we have to make the urban area as urban as we can, and the rural areas, and protecting them in being rural and continuing in that fashion. So yes, we have to go in that direction. If we go halfway, we're missing out on a lot of opportunity, and we're going to ask ourselves another 20 years down the road, why didn't we make this decision today? So that's where I found myself going through this document and kind of reflecting on the previous 20 years.
Yeah, those are good answers, everyone. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, just again on the engagement that we did with the public in many different forums, it was loud and clear that they want the downtown to densify, to save the outer areas so we can keep them rural. Loud and clear, time and time and time again. But I do know some people get a little skittish, but that's what the people wanted. And I think that's what I heard from the planning department too, is that makes sense to get our amenities that we want. We want the bus service. It's easier to do it from a dense town to town. So just this is well thought out about that downtown core, and it was loud and clear over and over again.
Yeah, I would agree. The other concern is that to stop sort of the suburban sprawl or that we're a bedroom community. And that is the case of folks leaving elsewhere to access those urban items that are not available right now. So they need to go somewhere. Or we're gonna see even more cars on Highway 14. Yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at the map that's on page 58, 59, the OCP land use designations. So sort of moving through that, it seems to connect there. Anything on the map? Go ahead, Councillor B.
Yeah, my only comment would be you've identified a Billingspit Kaltassin neighborhood planning area. Is it now, did you add the Whiffen Spit planning area? Or should you? Did you add-
I don't see, where do you see?
That's
Billings
on page 58 under the general area designations. Oh, that's changed.
That's
We've
changed.
updated that to be general in the sense that it's only neighborhood planning area,
Right, okay.
given the addition of Whiffen Spit.
All right, that's being removed. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so the mapping is fine. So on to the next page where it says 3.3, general land use policies. Go ahead, Councillor St. Pierre.
3.3.3, I think, does address some of the two stories, and the idea of actually having
Yeah.
more stories. So it is there, and I'm hoping that will be translated. And then on to 3.3.16 or 16. I was curious why the lead standard was used when
Yeah.
we're already on the STEF, and what are the advantages to doing that?
So that's one process that can be considered. And then you mentioned step code, that gets factored in when they actually apply for a building permit and have to go through that process. So at the development permit stage, they can incorporate all these elements that we can capture as conditions of the development permit. And then in addition to that, if those items are then included as part of meeting step code, good. If not, then they would just be additional benefits to the development in addition to the step code requirements that they have to meet at the building permit stage.
Okay, follow-up question.
Mhm.
When I was reading this, I was curious as to whether or not I saw the neighborhood development. It looks to me like lead can actually be applied to, for example, the entire development as opposed to the single building, which would be the building permit. Is that the case? As I was trying to figure this out, just why lead versus step? There has to be advantages and differences. Is that one of them? The neighborhood versus individual building?
There's the different iterations of how lead gets applied, and just making that distinction versus step code, like you were saying, that's a specific building that's coming in and the energy advisor is evaluating that building as to what level of step code they're meeting.
Okay, thank you. They were just questions.
Other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Bateman.
So back on page 60, 3.3.4 states support the establishment of compact neighborhood scale commercial. I'm wondering whether it'd be wise to add the word limited. So support the establishment of limited compact neighborhood scale commercial activities. Because we have heard this concern that we're creating a commercial strip right from the Prestige all the way out to Casinos. And that's definitely not the intent. And I see limited or compact.
The compact
sums
is
it
there.
up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think every development, every commercial is going to be limited. It has to be limited because it can't be unlimited. So I don't know if limited really,
Limited in a particular area.
the compact
we
really
have
kind of
one
says
per.
keep it tight.
Not, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Well, if we're going to use limited, it would be in front of compact.
In which point? Which policy point?
3.3.4. i.e. a limited number of.
I'd rather leave it.
Okay, good.
And I just say that because the entrepreneurial spirit in this town is amazingly creative. So when you see what some folks are able to accomplish in a small space, right? Just sort of let that creativity and entrepreneurial mind, and there'd be a process of development, permit approval or whatever, should it be out of scale. Councillor Beddoes?
Define limited. You can't. I mean, I don't know what that means. I mean, limited to you might mean a certain number per linear mile, and somebody else might think, well, that's excessive, and other ones think it's not enough. So I just think it's a hard one to pin down. I prefer leaving it like it is. I appreciate, what you're saying, and it is a concern of mine too. But I don't think we need to go that deep, honestly.
This is why we need to talk our way through this thing. Councillor Logans?
Last meeting on the OCP, we decided not to wordsmith words for this reason exactly, because we could go into each and every word. But I think when prominent ones come up, or if there's spelling errors or something like that, it's important to bring that up. But in terms of picking different words, it's so subjective in most cases.
Go ahead, Councillor St. Pierre.
Turn on your mic, please.
Thanks, Dana. I was hoping we could include the word infrastructure in policy 3.3.7 under cycling connections and infrastructure. Because we lack cycling infrastructure, it makes it difficult for people to actually use bicycles, for example, to go make purchases when there aren't shelters, there's no charging stations, there's bicycles at this point, the EV bikes also need charging stations, but it's being pretty much neglected. And yet a bike actually has way less footprint, easier to use, easier to buy. It's going to be a choice vehicle for a lot of people that can't afford a car or an electric car. The sooner we actually have the infrastructure, the more people can actually transfer over effectively. But we don't have any mention, from what I can tell, of doing anything like that.
In this document, it doesn't use that word infrastructure, but we do have the Parks and Trails Master Plan and Transportation Master Plan that address those.
I don't remember that document covering this, or the Parks and Trails Master Plan covering it in enough depth. And specifically with regards to EV bikes.
Right, but that's where that depth belongs. That depth doesn't belong in this policy.
As far as I'm concerned, if it's not covered in one document, we better pick it up somewhere.
Mr. Paolo, thoughts? Add it in? What do you think?
I'm fine either way. I think at the end of the day, those pieces are probably going to be very site specific. The main objective of the policy is to create the connections. The infrastructure would be a secondary component that perhaps another plan would capture, or this one could. But the objective, the intent of that policy is the connection piece for those pedestrian and cycling networks.
I tend to agree. If you're not safe to cycle, it doesn't matter if there's a charger. Like, the main part is finding it safe to get out on a bicycle, and then recognize that, okay, now that we're able to do that, what do we need to do next to make it safer? Not everyone will be able to afford an electric bike. Councillor Bateman.
So, under 115, it's the micro mobility readiness assessment. So that's a long-term transportation objective. So I think that'll be captured there. And the climate action plan that you'll be seeing next month has some of these ideas.
Yeah.
As long as it's covered somewhere.
Yep. I'd be pleased to note that I was walking my dog, someone with a stand-up electric scooter went right past me. I thought of you when that happened. I have a question under 3.3.9, sport home-based businesses to operate from residential homes. So we have also heard from the Chamber of Commerce about the need also for folks to be able to operate a business from a rental unit, which isn't necessarily a residential home, or is it?
So I recall that discussion. What we have currently in our zoning bylaw is limited home-based businesses, for the reason that I had mentioned the other night about additional traffic and whatnot. That's going to create more of an impact to the site, whereas a home-based business, there's additional criteria that can be considered and may accommodate that traffic and additional visits and whatnot. So support home-based business to operate from residential homes. Yes, I kind of on the surface, it looks like a standalone single-family dwelling. I'm just trying to think how we could address what was mentioned the other night as well, which the zoning bylaw captures it currently, but if we want to add something.
Should it just be residences? And that's, you need to work on your microphone.
I think we could just subtract something. If we just take away to operate from residential homes, support home-based businesses, kind of covers it. Our
Okay.
intent is to support home-based
Yes.
businesses. We don't need to specify where.
Okay, does that work? That works, because then the zoning bylaw will kick in, whether it's row house, townhouse, apartment, so forth, and all of those pieces, as well as the licensing process will also deal with the traffic, if any, case by case as individuals apply, right?
Yeah, the zoning bylaw will get into that more detailed
Yeah.
tiered level of different home-based businesses.
Okay, so that's good. Good one. Look, we're down a few words, Counselor Beddoes. Strike that right out. Counselor Bateman.
So I'm going back to 3.3.16 on 61, and I see at the end here, it says development cost charge rebates. So in the, at 11 PM the other night, we passed this epic new DCC bylaw without any comment. And in the staff report, it stated we would need to adopt a new DCC reductions bylaw, and that this particular option was not recommended by staff. So is it?
It's gone,
Oh,
right? Yeah, I don't see that
oh,
it's
never
gone.
mind.
So what they've
Oh,
had it
Lord.
here was in exchange for density bonuses or other incentives.
Right.
So that keeps our DCCs whole.
Yeah, we wanted to, recognizing that concern previously, we wanted to generalize the statement that's being made in the OCP, that it's other incentives to be explored.
Good. Okay, so I'm turning the page over to 3.4, to community residential. Is that okay? Okay, no reaction yet. So community residential. Purpose, uses, build form, density. So is this where we talk about things like, so uses in the community residential? Okay, this is where I see limited small scale neighborhood serving commercial and mixed use. So that's the economic development opportunity. Where does childcare fit? Is that institutional?
Yes, and I know, or commercial, where that commercial was kind of neighborhood blanket across in any of the zones. So we anticipate that a daycare, a commercial business, could operate throughout the community residential area. It would be general, so it could be.
But not every daycare is a business, some are not for profits.
So long as the zoning allows
Okay.
for the use, how they operate in terms of private or, yeah.
But childcare is covered in this.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah,
that's-
the zone, yeah, the zoning would allow for that.
Okay. So anything under community residential? Counselor Bateman?
Yeah, I was wondering whether we could put the word definition of gentle infill into the glossary.
I think that may be a good idea,
Yeah,
because again, gentle has, we probably look at it different ways,
yeah,
or not.
I get what it means, but I think it,
Okay. And then this would also address home-based businesses because that's in the other section. Got it. Okay. put a note, and you've answered this already, but I need to rely on you to answer this again. And I keep writing down fire on this because in order to achieve the gentle infill and potentially the detached suites, the fire services need to be met. So it comes down to how would this be achieved without the necessary fire coverage and response? And I'll be open about this. I've just, through my own building permit process, have become very alive to this and how limiting it can be in what would be considered a secondary, not a secondary suite in my case, but should anyone within a community like mine wish to do or progress this, they would not be successful because of the fire services.
So sorry, the concern is that in developing a neighborhood or a specific development, there's concern about the fire servicing requirements.
Yes, so I live in the community residential zone. If someone else had a house like mine, of which they do, wish to add a detached secondary suite, they would not be able to do that because our fire services does not provide 10-minute or less response. So you would end up with a shed with no windows. Well, that's where I just don't know. That's what I'm asking though, is we want to do this, but there's a known barrier. So how does it belong here or not when it comes to servicing? If this is how we want our community to grow, this will be a barrier to allowing that to happen.
I guess there's two items at play that I think I'm hearing. One is a servicing piece in terms of the service that you want to have. So fire being the example, and then the land use component of what can you allow in terms of uses on the property. So the building code allows, or the zoning allows for a specific type of use, and the building code explains how you can go about meeting the code requirements. If there's a concern about the type of solutions being implemented to meet the code, and it's a barrier and it's related to fire, then I think that's a different conversation outside
It's
the
not
land
code.
use.
This, what was given to me was the 20 less is we do not have 10-minute or less response in these neighborhoods. It's not a code issue, it's a servicing issue. So
then I think that at the zoning stage, when we're developing communities, we have to look at, as part of that referral process, which fire is a part of, their comments on how are we going to be able to provide fire service to these new communities. So I think that's a step that comes with every new development that goes through the referral process. Fire's concerns, is the street wide enough for the apparatus to get down? What's the response? What are going to be the solutions that if there is a fire, are buildings required to be sprinkler? Or what are the solutions to address fire service? If we want to go above and beyond providing a different type of service to those communities, then I think that's a much larger discussion on kind of fire's role in all of these pieces. We can set what the minimum requirements are to support a development. If we want to go a step further and do something different, that's a completely different mandate of what the municipality is going to provide for fire response.
I'll just say that it's coming our way, and I did some digging on this and concerns raised by department staff in previous years, that this will be a problem in terms of bringing infill, the gentle infill or additional infill or secondary suites to neighborhoods, because it doesn't exist. So that when we talk about this is what the vision is, it's the implementation is you will come into a wall. It's not code. It's not necessarily zoned. There's another factor here. I just don't know how else to raise it, but I'm going through that right now.
I just want to clarify, does this mean that you cannot get a building permit for that secondary detached suite if you don't have the 10-minute service? Is that the idea?
You wouldn't, it would be a conditional building permit. So then when you add in what you need to do, it will become cost prohibitive to do that.
So for example, they might ask for rooftop sprinklers or some sort of fire suppression system. Is that the idea?
Or not, or if you're dealing with an existing home, it becomes even more challenging and not fun.
Okay.
Councillor Logans?
Wouldn't that be a service related query? So hire more full-time on-site firefighters, problem solved.
But it's also Station 2 and looking at Station
And if you
2
hire
and where
them,
they all serve. Exactly.
Then they
So,
can go where you want.
yeah, so
I
that's.
think that fits in
why.
the budget.
It is a budgetary concern, but I just want to flag it because this, when it comes to land use with, we want to do this, we want to add infill to serviced areas, this is a barrier that will come up. So, and it was raised in the past when councils did not want to add to the complement. This is a result of not increasing our fire. This is a direct impact of not hiring more in the past. Ms. Machado?
Just wanted to let you know the fire master plan will be presented to council next Monday at the COW.
Okay, so I think, does this document point to that document yet? Guess not, because it's a draft, right? Okay. All right, we'll leave it for now. Okay, Gateway Residential, ooh, go ahead. Yep. Okay, can you? Ah. Limited, so limited, so what does that mean? That's right, we didn't want to use limited. So can we remove limited?
I can't hear.
Dana can't hear, so I need you all to utilize your microphones.
Yeah, Dana, I was just, Councillor Lajeunesse, I was just noting the use of limited on, under commercial residential uses. And how we'd flag that word earlier.
Small scale seems to cover it to me. Does limited need to be there? Mr. Schaefer?
I was going to suggest, but I think your solution is better than the one I had, which is to say small scale neighborhood serving commercial and mixed use. The opposite of limited might be unlimited, which you don't want in a residential community, residential neighborhood, right? You don't want a big strip mall there. So, but I think the small, just saying small scale neighborhood serving, if that's okay with Mr. Paolo, that would be fine. That's fine.
Yeah, I think that eliminates the confusion between the limited and the compact, and there's already the reference back to that initial policy of 3.3.4.
So limited is coming out. Good. Okay. Gateway Residential North.
So one comment that we did hear at the open house was the concern of the people who lived in the Gateway North area and the limitations on lot size. And so staff discussed this internally and we're willing to remove the distinction between the north and the south and revert it back to what we currently have in the OCP as just the Gateway residential area, since it seemed to be such a concerning piece on the lot sizes.
Okay, so then the two would be blended together into Gateway Residential.
Correct. So people would essentially have a land use designation similar to what currently exists.
The only piece then, so I'm going to look at the two together then, is under sort of additional directions. It's missing out the C2C completely. So Harborview Park, for example, is not referenced in here, which falls into the Gateway Residential. So how do we, I just sort of made a note, like what happened to biking, surfing, hiking, etc. So there's the pieces around farming, there's the tourism, there's farm tours, horseback riding, but there's no mountain biking. And I get that you can't surf from there, but I don't think that works, because even at the CRD, when we talked to Harborview, talk about Harbor View, some don't feel that mountain biking and horses are the same thing. One would argue that a mountain bike has less wear and tear due to the lighter weight on the land than a horse does, and the horse brings in invasive species. Just come up, but a mountain bike may or may not, so. But we have this significantly beautiful recreational asset within our community, and we don't even reflect that in here.
So I think in terms of the gateway area, the parks area is broken out into its own land use section. So the parks would be captured in there as opposed to the gateway specifically. While it's located within proximity, it's not specifically a gateway designation because we're not allowing for all these uses to be built within that park. It lands itself within the land use of the parks designation.
I have a degree in recreation management, and I think that it would fit under recreation. That's one thing I would have learned and kept with me over the years, but surfing, mountain biking, definitely recreation. So I think it's covered.
Okay. Pokemon, monster hunting, also a thing? Okay, good, because there's a lot of that happening right now.
Could even be leisure, which also fits into recreation, so you're good.
The other one I just want to add is just at the bottom of the page under Gateway Residential South, additional directions in the bottom paragraph. Work with Ministry Environment and Island Health. VHA is no longer their known acronym. Towards agreement and blah, blah, blah. The agreement will be based on the recommendation of District of Sauk Liquid Waste Management Plan. I think there should be a date perhaps of that plan, if that's what we're using now. Should there be a date there and regulated through the zoning bylaws, or do we just leave them out because knowing that either of these could be updated? Okay. All right, fine. So just put in the Island Health. Oh, that's also in the top. It's also in the paragraph above. Work with Ministry of Environment, Climate Change Strategy, and Island Health. Not VHA. And I just don't know if that ministry has changed names, but they do change. So we might just want to just that's current as of now. Okay.
Hello?
Councillor Lajeunesse.
Yeah, just a quick question through you to staff. So the Gateway Residential North and South are now just Gateway Residential?
Yes.
Yes, that's what's being proposed.
Okay.
Other pieces? Councillor Bateman.
So on page 64, we again have limited that needs to be removed. That seems to be my role tonight. But then on the next page, 65, we have a duplication of those last paragraphs. So the final paragraph, unless it's being caught, can you scroll to 65?
No, they're sort of different. Under additional directions, right?
Yeah,
Oh, wait a
on
second.
my
Wait
65.
a second. You are correct. There, it is the same. It's just one has the current ministry.
I wish I could scroll that.
They're a little bit, can you just scroll again a little bit more, like go to Gateway Residential, please? That's right. And one more,
One
keep
more.
going.
There we are.
There, yeah. These two paragraphs look almost the same. The bottom two under
Yeah.
additional directions.
They are duplicates.
So you just need to change, I think the bottom one could come out.
Yeah.
And then change in the one above, the third bullet, change VHA to Island Health, because that's the correct ministry and Island Health. And then the rest is fine, but the paragraph below has to go because it's a duplicate. All right, but then, well, I think staff can do that. Like you're going to, when you marry these two together is removing duplicates and stuff. And just, yeah. But that's, yeah, so that bottom one is out. Okay. So I'm turning to rural residential now. Oh, this is interesting, Councillor Logan's. Under uses, I wrote down no recreation, question mark. So agricultural related tourism, including bed and breakfast, farm tours, farm education, horseback riding, or similar land uses. So no recreation. So I think that's also where I was thinking about mountain biking and hiking and other pieces. So use, does appropriate like recreation belong here, or was there a reason why there's no recreation in rural residential lands?
No, it seems like it'd be appropriate to put similar recreational and leisure land uses, or recreational at the very least. That makes sense. Just to adjust this in that way. Can I ask Councilor Logan's?
Put it all on me. Yeah, adding recreation.
Rec
in there
expert.
makes sense
I
to
had
me.
recognized Mr. Paulo.
Sorry.
It's on the basis of what our agricultural or rural residential zoning allows for in terms of uses. So recreation isn't a use that's considered. When we're talking about the gateway area and factoring in recreation, we're thinking of it more as kind of a commercialized recreation opportunity. So, you know, whether you have surf or bike shops or whatever that kind of encourages that commercialized recreation opportunity, that's where we saw the gateway as being that tourism hub, as opposed to our rural residential areas, which are in fact for agricultural purposes primarily and don't contemplate recreation within the zoning.
So they don't recreate. Councillor St. Pierre.
So that's something I hadn't quite realized, but it's obvious in retrospect that the final bullet there is about economic development, such as agricultural related tourism, including bed and breakfast, farm tours, and so on and so forth. So we're looking at here is economic development opportunities. At that point, if you did include something like rec, it would be understood that it's meant to be an economic development opportunity, not simply just whatever. But I don't care either way, to be honest.
Well, the thing with recreation there, though, is that on the Southlands that fall into sort of the rural residential area, a lot of people mountain bike to get there. So I appreciate it. It does fall under their jurisdiction though. So, and that may be an activity that they may or may not want to encourage on the lands. I don't know.
I guess the biggest concern is the fact that we recognize that people may recreate on agricultural lands. However, they do so as a private landowner, as not as a use that can receive a permit for. So that's where we have to be cautious that if we're going to encourage this, we also have to consider the fact that are we opening up agricultural lands for recreation purposes, and how are we going to permit those types of uses? We'd rather direct those to designated park areas or commercial tourism locations that have the proper zoning to accommodate for it.
Is horseback riding an accepted agricultural use? Seems more like a recreational use.
Horseback riding, it falls under the agricultural aspects. It's recreational in nature, but it's related to the agricultural piece. The concern is if you say recreation, now are people going to be bringing in ATVs, other motorized vehicles, and the impact that will have on the agricultural lands? We want to have, you know, that low impact piece where it's more related to the agricultural upkeep of the lands.
Steer roping.
Petting zoo would fit. Right? Okay. I know, it's, what, okay. So we'll leave, we're fine with this or similar land uses? Okay. And again, in broad strokes, childcare is allowed everywhere. Okay. Okay, so we're finished with rural residential. I'm looking now at town center core. Oh,
Let's see your additional actions. So it should be.
Microphone.
okay, so what
It's
Councillor
just a
Bateman is
simple thing
added?
in alignment with the Agricultural Land Commission Act.
Yep, add another.
And acronyms should not be used unless you've used them previously and explained them, of course.
Yeah, and I'm assuming I saw that with CRD as well, so that needs to be
First
checked.
use.
Yeah, that also has been addressed. I don't want to go back and look.
No.
Okay. Town center core. Good, I'm turning the page.
I'm just wondering about the maximum 2.5 floor area ratio. And the reason is that if with a floor area ratio of 2.5, that means with a 6-story building, the maximum lot coverage is 42%. Should that be higher? Or does that mean that the remainder of the lot will be public space, or how is that going to work? Or is it just going to be surface parking?
It leaves the remainder of the lot, if they're going to build as high as possible, then yes, it would leave the lot to landscaping, surface parking, whatever other pieces necessary to serve the lot to be incorporated in there. We were trying to address what would work best for public acceptance on FAR. You know, we contemplated 3.5, you know, what was going to be acceptable. So the higher just provides for that additional density opportunities with their designs. So I'm not opposed to increasing, but certainly decreasing is a slippery slope.
Yeah, especially if the maximum height is 6 stories, because then you're not even covering half the lot. So, and I really want to discourage surface parking in the town center. We have way too much of that already.
So does this address that concern? Or
What it provides for an FAR that can be developed, but if council wants to increase it to 3, I'm not opposed to having that. It's just the comfort level of the public and making sure that they understand that this allows for that additional flexibility with the developer, and that the site will have more flexibility for development. by
if
doing
it
this.
stays at 2.5?
No, if you increase the FAR.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Because the higher you put it, the more variation. It gives more flexibility to the developer at that point. Ideally, at some point, what we want to do is get away from units per hectare and put it to FAR. But because this is the first introduction for SOUP to incorporate FAR as our density calculation, it's going to take some time for people to apply it and be comfortable with it. But ultimately, the FAR will give all the flexibility to the developer to be very unique in their designs.
And then that's where we can work on the other pieces, like, concealing the parking, putting it underground by increasing this.
Correct, because
Okay.
if we say X number of units per hectare, we're capping how many units we're allowing the developer to provide on that site. Whereas if we say FAR, it's the developer's opportunity to incorporate as many as they can based on this floor area ratio. So they might be able to get very unique in their designs and provide for more than what would have initially been allowed for if we just said cap it at 100 per hectare.
Right, but in doing that, so that's where the maximum 3 would be, like, honestly, I still can't visualize FAR at all. Solar,
Well, I think it basically,
get it?
uh,
I'm still speaking. Some say it's simple. I find it, I just don't get it. So, but I do want to have that flex. What I'm looking for is the outcome here that would provide for that flexibility and creativity to make the most of the property, because those are the challenges in the town center, is like it's either long and skinny or too small or whatever. So how do we make that more, to sort of get that piece? So that's where I don't know what is that number? I need you to say what it is, because I can't.
Yes, three will allow more variation to design up, which is essentially what we want to encourage within the town center.
Okay, so if that's the case, then why is the recommendation at 2.5 then? Like, why that then?
Because that, based on the concerns of the public with, how many stories is this going to incorporate? 2.5 was arrived as the acceptable piece at that time, because there was still an understanding of how many stories this is going to block the water, what is it going to do to views and whatnot. And if you go to 3, it increases additional opportunity for the developer, but it's still left to them to bring a proposal forward and decide, is this ultimately what's going to be accepted at a rezoning stage or a development permit stage.
so 3 would allow, FAR of 3 would allow 50% lot coverage, and an FAR of 3.5 would allow for 58% lot coverage. I have a little spreadsheet that I created here. That's what I'm just looking at.
What happens is if they're going to build to 6 stories, if they're on Brownsville Boulevard, or if they're going to build the 4 or 3 stories, they can take up half of the site as the building and then pack as many units as they can, and then make sure they still address parking and the other amenity requirements with the remaining 50% of the land area.
So the remaining 50% then would enable us to address resident concerns like shading, preservation of view corridors. Then that's why we would want that remaining piece to do.
If you have a lower FAR, it's going to have more of the site open. It's not going to be buildable. You have a higher FAR, more of the site can be built out. Eventually, you can get to an FAR where you basically can say 100% of the site can be built on, plus you can go up 6 stories.
Well, and that's where, sorry, I'm just stuck with this piece, but then that's where in some cases that might be a good fit, but this wouldn't even allow for that either. Then there would need to be an OCP amendment. Go ahead.
What Councillor Jeunesse is rightfully pointed out is that we're not necessarily making optimum use of a site if we're only covering 42% with the 2.5%, 2.5 FAR. From the public's point of view, really, the FAR doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't translate to what does that look like. The actual site coverage of 42%, that actually makes sense. For example, recently we had the Brownsville Boulevard development. They were covering 85% and 6 stories. I have no clue what their FAR is, but chances are some areas of the town center want to have that kind of an FAR as the max, where you actually are covering a good chunk of the site and you have that kind of height. But if you started putting down an FAR of 12, I have no idea what the number would be, but that's going to freak people right the hell out. So I would suggest that you need to actually make it much more visual and simple to understand, and simply go back, ideally, to translating it into it's a maximum of 6 stories. You can cover a maximum of this amount of the site, because then people actually understand what they're up against. They understand that it could go that high and it could cover that much. Otherwise, I think that because of this new concept, the FAR is just like an appropriate FAR would probably scare people. And then we're looking at OCP amendments in the future to try and put in appropriate development, which is annoying as hell.
Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, we kicked this one around, and the feeling was that this is the public's feeling, is that they didn't want a huge skyscraper downtown. So they did want some limitations on it. And we do want some openness to that downtown core. We don't just want to see building. So we kicked this around, staff kicked it around, and this is what we came up with. So it is a compromise. I understand what Councillor Lajeunesse says, and I'm kind of reluctant. I understand, but I have to go back to what the input was from the community, and this better reflects what the community wanted. And I know he's talking from an economic development point of view, but this is what the indication from the community, what they wanted to see downtown. So I'm okay with that 2.5.
So
I think as long as, I guess if people understand that that means that most of the land area in the downtown will be surface parking. That's okay. I think this needs to have a little bit better description so that people can get it, because I think I would like to see the FAR increased so that we can, it will incentivize developers to build underground parking because they can have increased density, which helps to cover the cost of that. But I don't want to see a downtown that has more surface parking lots than anything else.
okay, Councillor Bateman.
This is a very important discussion. So perhaps we could come back to it because clearly we'll be here again next Tuesday for this. And maybe we can see some massing diagrams and some, it's an important matter.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to have some visuals to help describe this if people are struggling with it.
Councillor St. Pierre.
I would agree, and I would request if we have some visuals, also to find out what does existing zoning allow in terms of footprint, in terms of percentage, because what's existing right now is likely to be okay with the community because that's what we already have. And determining what sort of FAR it would look like if you actually increase the height of the buildings to say 3 stories or 4 stories or whatever would give us an idea of what that might all look like. And the community would also have an idea what that might look like. I think it's scary when you start putting out numbers that are not easily translatable to reality for most people. You can translate to the reality of what's already there, and then we increase the height to this and it looks like that. We'll understand and they'll understand.
Thank you, Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, I'm okay going up to 3. Let's just get her done. It's what's it, 42% then 50? Is that the difference?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not comfortable just changing that because the committee put forward this and staff and the consulting team obviously brought this forward. So, and then when I look at where the town center core is in terms of like a lot of it is newly built. So how much of that area would come into play? Like it's because it's the north of Highway 14, right? So it's just understanding it. Otherwise, I'm fine if council wants to make a motion tonight. I won't support it because I don't understand it. I'm just struggling to understand it. Councillor Wilkins.
Do we need a motion to have to Councillor Bateman's request of having like a little staff report in a sense with visuals come back with different FARs so that we can then go back and make sure each one of these has something that's appropriate?
You want to make one?
Yes. I'm so always so bad with motions on the fly. Councillor Bateman might have to help me out with this.
Yeah.
Council, why don't you? It was your
Yeah,
motion.
so the council would accept a short report on FAR.
Sorry, Dana, on FAR, FAR as applicable in the town center.
And potentially we might encounter this in other areas. So on
And
FERs,
To the next OCP chapter review.
To the next OCP chapter
Chap.
review.
You say? Never mind.
Your worship, it was a bone of contention all through the FAR is, even though there's a simple calculation, it is very confusing to people. So I'm okay with that.
All right, so there's a motion on the floor. So any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, town center transitional residential. Anything on 3.9? I'm looking at 3.10, the waterfront. So this one as well has the 2.0. So this is even less. Farce.
Yeah, I think let's leave this one until the next discussion too, till we have a better understanding.
Councillor Beddoes?
Just bear in mind that, again, the committee looked at that and there's an overall public, they want to leave as much open space down there for the view of the waters. So if you have a low FAR, whether it's street parking or whatever it is, it does, you're not going to have a solid wall of buildings there. There's going to have to be some space on them. And that was the reason why they wanted that, because that's what the public wanted to see. But anyways, you guys can deal with it another time.
No, thank you for that, Councillor Beddoes, because I wrote a note to myself, view corridors, how? ? So you just answered how that was meant to be
Yeah,
accomplished.
we consider that greatly, especially that's why there's such a difference between the waterfront and the upper portion.
Yeah.
It's just so you can see that water, even if it's just a pretty small.
Mr. Powell, just because I'm very slow to comprehend the FARs, could you also please provide in that report? So with Mariners Village, what is that, for example? Then I can look at an existing, the Harborside, the co-housing project, the development permit that we just heard on Monday. Like, then it's like, okay, I see it. It'll just help bring some, I'll be able to understand it. I need to look at something. Councillor St. Pierre?
I think that with regards to what Councillor Bettis was saying, the need to maintain viewscapes, the need to not have these massive buildings basically blocking everything and feeling that way. My sense is that something that's been mentioned before is terracing, and it's in the OCP as well. If we could actually provide incentives to do terracing in terms of actually higher FARs with terracing, that would make a lot of sense, because at that point, you're not actually blocking the views. You're not actually causing all of these problems, but then you can actually offer the higher density and the greater development options in return for the terracing. So I'd like to be considering something along those lines.
I like that too, because then you could see if there's a way for a developer to say, okay, well, if I go up higher, then our design allows for this. We've concealed the parking and we've addressed that neighbor. If there's some way where they're addressing the view corridor in an innovative way, then I would like to, then okay, our objective of concealing of meeting and preserving the character of the viewscapes has been accomplished, and they've been innovative in coming up with something different. Yeah. So I think it's just allowing for that flexibility there, but I look forward to the report. Councillor Beddoes. Good? Okay.
Question?
Yes.
So I missed the report. That was a motion.
Yes.
Sorry, I missed it. I was making notes. When was the expectation that information would come back?
Next review. meeting.
Tuesday.
Yes. A week from yesterday. Sorry, Mr. Pello.
Get on it.
Okay, so then this is where the built form, but then I guess it's how these two even play in. So under built form, where you have the building heights to 4 stories, scaling down to 3 stories, and then 6 stories, could you even increase the FARs while maintaining that height?
Well, the idea is that so if you had, just say, for example, three-story height and a 3 FAR, that means 100% lot coverage and 3 stories up. If you go 6 stories, as we were discussing earlier, the 3 FAR would be 50% lot coverage to go up to 6 stories. So by going higher up, we open up more land space to create that public pedestrian experience for pocket parks or other types of amenities, or ideally have the buildings brought to the street side so that that area can be then in the rear yard to create additional amenity space for the apartment tenants and whatnot. If they want to go lower stories and maintain that airspace to be open, then they can build out more on the property and have more lot coverage. Right. Yeah.
Because that's where the individual nuances of the land come into play.
Right. So you lose out on height, but you gain on lot coverage. Yeah. Or you gain in height, but then you lose out on the amount of land that you're developing on your site. Incorporate that more into unique design characteristics for the town center experience. Just one thing I also want to mention just about the FAR examples. I've been notified by corporate services that the agenda has to go out tomorrow because of the timing for the Tuesday meeting. So we would not be able to incorporate that FAR example into the report in time.
Okay. What's that? Additional item? Oh, I see, to have it come as a supplementary. Sorry, Mr. Powell, you're not out of it yet. It'll have to come as supplemental.
I tried.
Well, it may just, I think it's that. No, literally what'll help me with this is Mariners Village. And this is what that is. This is the Evergreen Mall. And this is what that looks like. This is because those are real examples in our town that I can look at. I'm like, okay, I see. And okay, or the, you know, some of the other ones that are built might help with that. Maybe.
I'll find my old drafting equipment, and get the scale out. Get that.
Okay, I'm looking at employment lands. So one thing that comes up a bit sometimes is on our desire to be a complete community. So where does waste management or recycling or waste reduction come into play? My understanding is those are all heavy industrial. So where would those go?
Employment lands would be the most appropriate as an industrial use.
So where it says uses being industrial, it's not specific to
Anything under the
Anything
industrial.
under industrial
yeah.
goes, okay.
Yeah. And then the zoning would determine specifically, is this a light, medium, heavy industrial type use?
Okay, because then like where I get confused is when it goes under support office and commercial and industrial areas, which complement light industrial redevelopments.
Right. So that's talking about specifically office and commercial uses where they could be compatible with the light industrial uses, but not necessarily compatible with heavy industrial. So we have to look again at the zoning to say light industrial usually does have a blend of commercial uses. And then as we progress towards heavy industrial, those commercial uses fall off the allowable use list. And you're really those uses that have potential offsite impacts like waste or other noise emitting, light emitting type uses.
Or things like welding or heavy machinery.
Correct. Lots of truck traffic,
Auto
loud
repair.
noise. Yes.
Okay, but all of that is accommodated in this particular.
In the employment lands, yeah.
Okay.
The intent of the employment lands is to kind of capture all of those general uses and then allow for the zoning to establish what lots are appropriate.
Okay. Counselor Bateman?
A few minor things. Low carbon resilience needs to go into the glossary. That's the first, and I think the only reference in the whole document to low carbon resilience. We also have to have eco-industrial park.
Can you just go a little more specific to which point so we can?
Okay,
follow
low
you?
carbon resilience is in purpose line 2.
Okay,
In line 3, I was curious about to encourage industries. Would it be to encourage business activities rather than industries? I don't know if that's
That's kind of the same thing. People refer to the restaurant industry as an industry.
fair game. Under additional directions, development of an eco-industrial park, and those are a thing. United Nations Industrial Development Organization talks of those, so it'd be worth defining those in the glossary. And I was just curious about the last line. So these are employment lands outside of the community growth area. They will act as a local community hub. That's so a community hub to me seems to be a gathering place for people. But this is an employment land, so it could be a closed shop, could it not?
Sorry,
Just a business that carries on without being a community hub.
just want to refer back to the land use map. So we've shown on the land use map on page 59, the 17-mile location as an employment land. So just showing that those areas not requiring specific servicing and also located outside of the community growth area, that we're still recognizing their importance, and they kind of create that community hub experience or node. I mean, there's different terminology you can use, but essentially that will serve the community in a specific way. We know there's been past proposals about grocer, maybe coffee shop, liquor store, and so on, similar to what's somewhat there now. So it serves that more rural aspect.
Also, I've seen examples of business parks that are adjacent to sports and recreation facilities, and that is kind of a nice fit as well.
There are some designs I've seen throughout the United States where, based on large land areas, they've incorporated kind of their tech eco parks for multiple businesses, and then based on their parkland dedication and requirements, being such a large tech park, they can incorporate some of those recreational components in there, and they do so in a safe manner, knowing that you're going to have children and other younger individuals in an area where there might be truck traffic and whatnot. So they establish that all at the planning stages for those tech parks, and good use of the land throughout.
Mhm.
okay. Counselor Beddoes, can you just take over chairing, please? I need to use the facilities.
sure. Okay.
I need a health break.
Actually, I'm sensing that others agree with
Okay.
me, so we'll recess for 7 minutes. Is that good? Okay, thank you.
I need a coffee, so I'm gonna go see. Oh, sorry.
It's 8:48. We'll be back at 8:55. Okay, we're on, oh, pardon? Okay, we'll just wait for Councillor Lajeunesse to return.
I'm here. My health break included some chili, so I'm just eating.
Okay, so we're moving on. So we are on agriculture, 3.2. Pardon?
One quick comment. In additional directions, encourage organic and other sustainable farming practices. Organic really doesn't mean much. You can have some extremely high carbon organic type stuff, like ridiculously worse than standard even. I don't think it's necessarily what we want to absolutely encourage. What's used generally more often now is regenerative. So regenerative farming practices, and that covers both sustainable, organic, and all the rest of it.
Can you just point out, oh, I see, okay, the second sentence under additional directions.
Yeah.
Encourage
Regenerative farming practices.
regenerative.
Yep.
Like it.
Means you are regenerating the land, putting carbon back into the soil and such.
Encourage regenerative and other sustainable farming practices.
Sure.
Okay. Other pieces on agriculture?
Just directly below that. Another minor item, but it's the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries guide to using and developing trails in farm and ranch areas, not ranching. I looked it up today.
Okay, so we'll ensure the right.
You know, what a role.
The interesting one, just a question here is where it says in that same sentence, under additional directions, the third point, ensure sufficient buffers, including roads and right of ways between agricultural lands and adjacent non-agricultural practices. The interesting piece there is currently in the roads and the right of ways and the buffers are filled with broom and blackberry and poison hemlock. So they're buffers, but I don't see how that buffer is serving either the agricultural land or the non-agricultural land in a good way because of what they contain. So,
We turn it no man's land.
yeah, and then it comes down to what our staff capacity is and how well we mobilize volunteers to address those pieces. So it's an implication of that, but it causes another problem. Because all of those things are in those areas.
So when we go through the planning process and the Agricultural Land Commission provides their comments, they're typically saying where there's an adjacent property that is of non-ALC status, they want that buffer to be established, whether that's covenanted on the property or through development permitting process. It's showing that they have, a 15-meter setback from the property line. After that's been established, typically that's the property owner's responsibility to meet whatever Agricultural Land Commission requirements. If it's other areas such as a roadway that we're talking about for a buffer, then it's just a matter of time when that roadway, if it's an undeveloped roadway, to actually establish it and have it developed. But I don't, and this is where it's an ongoing conversation with the Agricultural Land Commission as to what are their expectations of the buffer. I think for us, as long as 15 meters from one property to the other has been established, if that's what they're looking for, if there's a road that creates that buffer and it's undeveloped, we have to discuss, as an organization, are we developing that road at some point in the future and getting rid, I think, of the nuisance that you're mentioning, whether it's, invasive species or whatnot. So I think there's a couple layers of discussions that we have to have. Is this something that we have on a long-range transportation planning objective to develop this road? Is this something that is the responsibility of a developer? So we're waiting on a developer to build that road and then remove those invasive species. So there's a whole bunch of other items in play. And up until that point, I think you're referencing, is this something that Parks is going to be actively maintaining? And that's another discussion. So I think there's a whole bunch of major pieces in there, and it's not so much the creating of the buffer that's going to create the nuisance issue.
But it sort of is already. So so I'll talk about an area that's built with a road and there's a buffer, but that buffer is filled with invasive species. And our Parks Department doesn't have the capacity to eradicate all of it. Like, there's just so much of it. In some ways, you would almost think that farming up into that, like if it was just grass and you had a goat, it might eat all of that. I don't know. Councillor St. Pierre?
I can answer that. As a matter of fact, broom and some of those species do actually take over areas that are not farmed. As soon as you farm them, and often the best way to do that is just sheep or goats or any sort of animals of that type, they won't eat the broom, but they'll bark it. They'll eat the bark around the broom will drop dead. If you pass pigs, they'll root out the roots. Basically, livestock and farming will actually take care of it. The other thing that will take care of it is actually tree planting, because as soon as you plant trees, the broom doesn't actually survive in the shade. Most of these invasive species need a lot of light. So you might want a strategy to either allow farming in certain ways. So basically passing ruminants, which wouldn't be a problem. It wouldn't preclude passing a road through in the future. You're not doing anything particularly significant. You're just allowing it to be pasture. That would eliminate those invasives. And you could actually, I've lost my train of thought. Ruminants, grass eaters, bark eaters, goats, sheep, that type of thing. Yeah, an animal. Both those things will take care of it. And planting trees, like for example, if we're treating it as park, maybe it's not treated as park. Maybe we follow Councillor Beddoes' suggestion and plant some trees. Yeah, I'm listening.
Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, the idea of the buffer is that, farming can be very smelly and messy. And the idea is that the residential area will have a little bit of a break. You're not going to have a cow pooping right on where you've got your lawn chair in your backyard. So that's the idea of the buffer. And my understanding from people is they want that.
And
But I understand.
I completely appreciate that. I'm just thinking of, okay, in Sun River where we have agricultural land, one of them is a big field, like there is a buffer, it's filled with broom. And there will be no road going through there because the road system already exists. And then on Phillips Road, whatever that other road, I'm going to pick on you where your property is, there is the buffer and it's filled with all of that. So and then all the way up it goes. So even if Cast Iron removed all of their broom, at the end of the property, it all starts again and up it goes the whole roadway, which is why we've been trying to broom bust in there. So I just think if we did, and I get why we want that buffer, but at the same time, I think we need to look at it. There has to be another way, because even today now, or the other day, I got a lot of concern around poison hemlock that's in another part of Souk, and we don't have the capacity to be on top of it. And it's in the road right away. So the resident adjacent, they don't want to touch it because it's dangerous. So it's just going to keep spreading and spreading and spreading. So if we're going to be firm in this way, we're going to continue to have this problem, I think. So how can we do this to ensure that we're getting the farming, but also addressing these noxious weeds that are exploding everywhere? But that doesn't address agricultural uses. And this isn't a park or a trail. This is a road right away. Councillor Bateman?
Why we're referring to these best practice guides for developing these buffers. So perhaps they have the answers.
Do they? Do they deal with invasive species and weeds in there? I haven't read that. I haven't followed like. Or poison hemlock, because those aren't all over where the ALC is. They're very specific to our region. Councillor St. Pierre?
Question through your staff. So who's responsible for those areas at this point in time? As in, are these buffers still theoretically under the ownership of the landowner, of the farmer, or is it the district that owns it?
The buffers that are required from the Agricultural Land Commission are usually the ones that are established on the neighboring property. So you have an agricultural parcel of land, if there's new development, they're asking that there be a portion of area set back. So it's that property owner's responsibility to ensure that they're not proposing development within that area, because they would be encroaching into that setback area that's established to keep development out of there. So that's primarily where it's come up recently.
Okay.
Those buffer areas.
If the land is still under the ownership of the farmer and they're basically being told, don't farm on it, then obviously you're gonna have invasive species no matter what. Having said that, if you have neighbors and they don't want, cows pooping, literally almost in their backyard, that's reasonable. It seems to me that Councillor Bateman is absolutely correct. There's probably some good recommendations in these documents, but unless you replace it with something, the invasive species will show up. So if you don't want tall trees, you should have low bushes that won't necessarily shade out, for example, a neighbor's garden or some such, but you have to put something, otherwise the invasives will show up.
But that's not the property owners. It depends. Right.
Mike,
Okay, Counselor, I'll come to you in a moment. Counselor Lajeunesse, Counselor Logans.
It is interesting because we're telling people not to put anything there, but I also think it's not appropriate for us to use the OCP to tell people what exactly to put there, but should rather educate people on why invasive species shouldn't be there. But I do agree with Councillor Beddoes that this buffer should be there. I mean, it's not just him saying that, it's the community for many reasons. The word invasive species doesn't come up anywhere in this entire document, and I think for good reason. But perhaps it should be an educational component instead. And we might be able to get some help from the ALC, maybe to have some ideas that they can share with us to spread good examples of what can be put in this buffer area.
I'm not
Wait,
sure what we're
just-
trying to do here.
There's a speaking order, sorry. Ms. Mushata, then Counselor Lajeunesse.
Thank you, Your Worship. I pulled up that guide, and invasive species is addressed in that Trails in Farm and Ranch Area Guide. And there's 15 mentions of invasive plants and species in that document.
Okay, good. Counselor Lajeunesse? You're muted now.
yeah, no, I'm good. I just was commenting that Councillor St. Pierre was muted when he was speaking last.
Okay. Well, I need you all to manage your own microphones. So, okay, well, I think then that's covered then. Things that come up. 3.13 is parks. Counselor Logans?
I think last meeting we decided to put in the links for all of all the plans, et cetera. By putting 2020 in, that could date this document if we ended up having a new master plan during the time the documents.
Yeah, so
Created,
take
so,
that date out,
yeah.
and that's what we've done with references to other plans. Counselor Bateman.
Yeah, in the third bullet point under purpose, the final line states to support equitable population health outcomes. So that's something I'd like to see in the glossary as well. Just
So what does that mean? Equitable population health outcomes. We're on parks right now under purpose, third bullet down. So if that's what we're supporting, equitable population health outcomes.
So the idea is that having parkland is a component to a healthy lifestyle, and so making sure that all have access, and however they engage with these park land uses, that they benefit in whatever form that helps them have a healthy outcome to their lifestyle. So, I mean, how I use a park is going to be different from other people, but if we both, at the end of the day, have a more enriched lifestyle because of the incorporation of park in our daily use, then it's a good, healthy outcome.
Okay.
So is that a
Comprehensive.
glossary item or not? Because I think I'd like to see that in the glossary.
I think a good,
personally.
That's not it's not like a term though, those words together. Each of those words is separate, not really together as a term that can be glossified.
I think it's more the piece around equitable that needs to be, and I think that is somewhere, that would be the piece to define. Go ahead.
I suggest that fewer words would actually help here again. If we just remove population health outcomes and equitable access, because that's really what we're talking about. The health outcomes are what, as Mr. Pella was saying, whatever people want to use it for. And I think that's really kind of a fuzzy, weird area that doesn't really need to be mentioned. What we're looking for is equitable access.
So what do you want it to be again?
Just remove population health outcomes and put equitable access.
What?
I like that.
I don't know. Felt the same to me.
It's a strange phrase that everybody's struggling with, so I suggest removing it.
Yeah, that would work, or just simply to support a healthy community. I.e., we're all in this together.
How about that? Support a healthy community.
I think the equity piece is the critical piece here. That's not included in healthy community.
We don't include that in healthy community.
Unless you define healthy community, you include the word equity.
I think it's the outcomes, right? So I think it's fine as is, and then I think the equitable piece is defined. Comprehensive development. The one piece that I'll add here is, I think you need to add under additional directions, are culturally significant for both the Shaanu and South Nation. And consultation with those nations for development must be part of the application and planning process. It's not going to be all, but certainly there are areas where the territories may overlap a bit. And then I suppose like the Tamach Treaty is moving outside of this. So is there a need to reference that or not really? True.
Yeah, I was going to say I would probably recommend addressing that as items progress and it has an impact on decisions that have been made with this document. I think it's a relevant piece that would suggest an OCP amendment may be required if it's that impactful to what we've established.
Okay, I think that from what I've been learning about the drip on the legislation coming through the province, it will trigger a change to this document. So I'm just, it's coming and there is going to be an impact on a lot of things. So I think it's just being mindful of that. For sure. The other piece here is I see VHA again, and that needs to be replaced with Island Health. By the district and Island Health. That's in the third direction set under, sorry, a third bullet under additional directions and must be approved by district, by both the district and Island Health, I think, by both the district and Island Health.
This, maybe we talk about this now, or maybe we talk about this later, but on page 72 with the parks. If the Lions building goes ahead, where does that fit? I don't see that fitting in accessory dwellings and outbuildings. Like a recreational facility.
Institutional use.
Okay, thank you.
Or anything else under comprehensive development? I'm turning the page. Ooh, neighborhood plans. It's like we've been here before.
So in the first bullet there, we have South Nation existing residents, partners, business owners. What about School District 62? Would they not be part of that?
That'd be
partner.
partners,
Okay.
right? Do we have a partner? Yeah.
Yes, when we commenced the OCP review process, we established all of our partners to engage with, and they were included in that list.
All right. In that same line, you've got billings. Should be an S on billing. And there's a number 3 at the very end of the final paragraph.
Yes. But no seals.
No seal level rise on this page.
So this is where, from our former motion made earlier tonight about the piece around other neighborhood plans. Mr. Paolo, just thoughts on, do we just put that from that action, just the cut and paste and put the same thing in here?
Within the purpose, yes, I would
Okay,
make that inclusion so the 3 areas all linked to each other.
okay. Ms. Machado?
Sorry, just, did you want to add the Shawnee Nation in this area as well? The South Nation is mentioned twice.
Yes.
What's the other item that Mr. Pablo will be adding in the bullets?
Well, when we made that our earlier motion about neighborhood plans, we added that to the action list. So it's just so that they all match up. It's just taking that piece under action items, land use, that we added that 3rd item. I didn't write it down fully. So we just need to take that and put it in here so that this matches what's over there.
This was also, I think, the place where we might put additional district objectives like trails, reducing emissions, employment opportunities, so on and so forth. So the community should have, with a neighborhood plan, the community should have the opportunity to determine those sorts of things, like what sort of businesses they want to allow, where do they want to allow them, how do they want to reduce their emissions, what services they want, so on and so forth. The services that Sun River is going to want are going to be different from Whip and Spit or from the waterfront. You know, if there's lots of children, if there's no children, if there's an aging population, so that the community needs to have a chance to determine the shape of the community.
But does that fall under where it says additional directions, like use, build forms, and density? Like uses would cover off all, like a lot of that, would it not?
Question, Mr. Pablo?
So when we, under the additional directions, we're essentially trying to recreate what we have in the other sections that come before this, where we talk about uses, density, height, and so forth. So the direction is that when we establish those neighborhood area plans, is we're creating a mini OCP for that area. So we're going to get all of those elements defined through community engagement.
Okay, so as defined as a mini OCP, I would agree that that's covered. That's what it is.
Yeah, I say mini OCP because essentially you're capturing those elements at a more detailed level for a specific area. So the neighborhood area plan accomplishes a more detailed OCP direction.
My concern is that in spending a lot of time and money on a public engagement process, that you wouldn't actually capture things like what businesses do you want? What services do you want? What do you want your community to look like in 10, 20 years? I mean, this is an opportunity for people to really have a voice in the shape of their community and where should want to go. And as soon as you put that stuff down on paper or on a drawing or whatever, there's a much better chance of realizing this is a wonderful opportunity for people to actually develop the communities they want. And it makes sense to actually make use of that time and money.
For their neighborhood though. Yeah. Counselor Bateman?
Yeah, I'll just note under additional directions now. So the final line refers to the shoreline and sea level rise. So that is in reference to Billings, Spit, Kaltassin, and Whip and Spit. So you might want to take that out as a separate bullet and refer back to Billings, Spit, Kaltassin, and Whip and Spit. because other neighborhood plans won't need to consider storm surge.
They might need to
Capiche?
consider atmospheric rivers though, with
They might.
significant flooding or the tsunami risk zones
Drought,
depending.
they could
right?
consider wildfire. All this other
Yeah,
things.
so I think maybe just separating those into 2 bullets makes sense.
Okay,
The other piece there is a valid concern about soup losing its character. So is there a way under purpose to just add that in? Where was it here? It does say to seek complementary land use that support a shared community vision for the area and honor soup. But like, how can we add something that just say that embraces soup's character, that I don't know. Does it say that?
Is consistent with.
But does shared community vision capture that? Are they the same or different? I sort of see them as 2 different things, like our vision is for the future, our character is who we are. Councillor St. Pierre?
I would agree, but on that same point, 3rd bullet, it makes sense to me just to separate that out, because to seek a complementary land use that supports a shared community vision for the area is one thing. Honoring the Sioux Nation's priority for this land would be for me, a different bullet. They do have to work together, but they're still in the same section, so they can work together. It's just that developing a shared vision, very specific thing, that actually also relates very strongly to developing that distinct character and maintaining the character. The shared vision and the character are linked. Yeah. Well, developing the shared vision helps maintain the connections and the character.
I think it can all stay together. You just talk it out and it's like, okay, that sounds good. I'm not trying to be flippant about it. I just think sometimes when I'm not talking to myself and I'm actually speaking with others, it's like, okay, that's the answer, because I don't seem to get the same outcomes on my own. I'm looking at a shot of Whiff and Spit. The next page, 70, this page, right here. So that was added. That was a blank page, I guess. So Whiff and Spit's. This is current, right? Can you just scroll up? Is that what's on the next page? Good. Okay. So I want to do a check-in. It's coming on 9:25. So we've been here for just over 3 hours. Where I see some fading away. And yeah, and so how's everyone feeling with this?
Losing focus.
Yeah. I'm hearing losing focus, fading.
Don't mean
I
to.
think this is a good place to pause.
Councillor Beddoes?
I don't care. I just assume that we move on if we've got time, but if everybody's tired, then we'll knock off. I'm fine. I could do another couple hours if need be, but it's not just me here. So.
I'm getting my second win, so I'm with you, Councillor Beddoes, but we may lose quorum if that's the case. And so I think maybe we need to call it a day. Okay. Okay. All right, so I need assistance from our corporate officer. We've made some motions, so we need to resolve. Looking at the wrong agenda faceplate.
Sorry, to the committee of the whole rise and report.
Okay. And then we go back into council, right? So then we can endorse those motions. Okay, so I'll look then for a motion then that council rises from the committee of the whole. Moved by Councillor Bateman. Would you like to motivate?
That we rise.
Yes, you'll need a microphone. Okay. Good. Okay, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor, please? That's unanimous. So now we're sitting again as council. So we'll just wait till we have any resolutions that we made out of the cow to come forward. So there's two here. If you could just move the text box a touch. There we go. Thank you. So there's two. I'm going to read them together. Okay. That council directs staff to add an additional line to the future neighborhood planning paragraph on page 55. Other neighborhoods within the district of Sooke will be considered for neighborhood plans through the life of the OCP. That council directs staff to add the following new action items on page 159 under land use. Consider and identify neighborhoods in Sooke for future neighborhood plans with a medium-term time frame. There was one more about a staff report. That council directs staff to bring forward a report on the FAR in the town center, including graphics to the next OCP chapter review. So I'll require a mover.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Lajeunesse and seconded by Councillor St. Pierre. Would you like to speak to this motion, Councillor Lajeunesse?
I think we've spoken to it enough.
Hey, Councillor St. Pierre.
Same.
Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. I'll look then for a motion that council adjourn the meeting. Moved by Councillor St. Pierre, seconded by Councillor Logans. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. So reminder, our next OCP meeting is scheduled for June 21st. Pardon, yes. We have a council meeting, or sorry, we have a committee of the whole at 7 o'clock on Monday, June the 20th. And then a special council meeting on Tuesday, June 21st at 6 p.m. 6 p.m.